Would you like to reach our film and TV review podcast audience? Do you have a product or service of interest to film and TV home consumers or followers of the entertainment industry? Have a film or show production to publicize? For affordable price plans for all budgets, get in touch and find out about our introductory advertising options. Reach our audience of film and TV viewers and visit our site contact page at filmandtvreview.com, or you can email us at business@filmandtvreview.com. Reach out today. Welcome to filmandtvreview.com. Catch the latest film, TV and streamed show reviews every week. The views and opinions expressed by the authors and those providing comments are theirs alone. They do not reflect the views, opinions or position of filmandtvreview.com or their respective parent companies or affiliates. Filmandtvreview.com makes no representations as to accuracy, completeness, correctness, suitability, or validity of any information in this program and is for entertainment purposes only. Episodes may contain adult humor and language. For full terms and conditions, see filmandtvreview.com.
Hello there, and welcome to this TV review special. It is, and today we're covering really the 60th anniversary and the phenomenon that is Doctor Who, very much a British institution for those listening around the world. So, for this opportunity to do a nice retrospective look at the whole 60 years of this long-running sci-fi series. It's all available, I think, definitely in the UK on BBC iPlayer for the next year or so, all the incarnations of the Doctor. But it's starting in 1963. I'm joined by James today, and another, I say a Doctor Who expert almost. But if you've grown up in this country, you kind of it's been part of your childhood in and out anyway by default. Hello, James. Well, thank you for joining me. So 60 years. What is, I think, for those who really, like I said, it's quite a bit of a British institution, but it has grown into worldwide appeal. Years. Well, but for a starting guy, what is or who is
Doctor Who? Well, I wonder if it's you, Jason, because obviously people can't see this, but you look like you've turned up in like an audition outfit to this is who your Doctor's going to be. I'm very much in an Eccleston minimalist cashmere jumper. But Doctor Who is an alien from the planet Gallifrey. He has two hearts. He has run away from Gallifrey in a stolen spaceship, which is the TARDIS. It stands for Time and Relative Dimension in Space. And it can assimilate, when it lands in anywhere in time and space, it assimilates an item from that world so that it disguises itself and nobody knows that it's a spaceship. However, in the first episode, largely due to BBC budgetary restrictions in the day, it lands as a police box and then gets stuck like that because the chameleon circuit is broken. And because the Doctor kind of likes the vibe of the 1960s police box, which we don't have in the UK anymore. I think there might be some in London that they've sort of left for sentimental reasons, probably owing to this show. He never fixes the chameleon circuit. Sometimes people say that you can change it. And I think in one of the Colin Baker ones, he indeed does. But generally, he goes around in the police box. When we meet him in 1963, he is traveling with his granddaughter. And she does eventually leave the show. He goes off with her school teachers as well, takes those with him to the far future and to the past, and then they travel with him for a bit. And as he goes amongst his journeys. He picks up different companions. It sounds a little bit dodgier than it is, but he will travel with them maybe for 2 or 3 years, and then they move on that way. And he sort of seems to sort of just have a sort of peculiar relationship with the human race. When we meet him, he doesn't seem that enthralled with humans, but he seems to warm to them over the 60 years and seems to get involved in a lot of their life and death shenanigans. That was a bit of a longer summary than I thought, but I think it sums it up pretty well.
Yeah. Well, it's no, well done on that. But yeah, like I said, I've been revisiting these older episodes, and I, of course, did been watching. I mean, of course, the first incarnation of the Doctor, and it's William Hartnell. It is very, yeah, like you say, it's very more of a colder character, very matter of factly, kind of like a more the sense of the adventure at the expense of his companion just happening there. I know it's one of them is his granddaughter, but it's obviously starts. I think the premise was is an educational show for kids about let's learn about history, and which was educational. While we put this one into the budget, and it does that, but it quite quickly started into quite interesting. When you think about it, it's quite a good vehicle for concepts and about preconceived notions and all that, and you could say it's ahead of its time, but it's just a very flexible format.
So, well, the BBC, in its sort of remit, its mission statement is to inform, educate, and entertain. So this would have been devised almost on that basis. So certainly when you're going into the future, you're talking about very entertaining things, spaceships and monsters, but there is often, with all good sci-fi, there's a parallel to the real world as well, and there might be a social issue they're talking about. You've also got the historical aspect where you can go back and then make use of the BBC's very good sort of wardrobe department and all the things that they do for that, and that I think was very much the idea as well, that you could go and do that. Although there is a definitely sort of a mythology that goes throughout the show. I think particularly in the classic years, as it was called, so the original run from 1963 to 89, you've got stories that do kind of stand alone. It is almost like an episodic, like you used to have Play for the Day or something, and they just do a one-off thing. You've got these stories that could almost stand alone, but you've got these characters that weave it, and you don't really have to know that much about the characters, particularly in the classic era. They've just turned up, they're in the middle of this, and now we're in the Roman Empire, or now we're on Skaro, the planet of the Daleks, and you've just got the sense that the Doctor lands there, the story plays out, and then he goes at the end. There was never really a sense, particularly in those days, just because it would have been very complicated, of him messing with the laws of time. Once he's there, he would see the story out for 3, 4, 6 episodes and then fly off somewhere else. And it kept that sort of linear nature of the show. Once you're in the story,
which is a format I kind of miss when you're looking back at it. It's kind of like you can. It's actually quite good for the era of streaming where you can just pick up maybe 2 or 3 episodes and your story's done. Wow. Yeah. Now, obviously, you've got seasons 1, 2, and 3 of any show, and you think, oh, how can I pick this up? I'm going to have to go back to the beginning. But it's very, really just pick it up. Like revisiting all these episodes up for the past 60 years, honestly, you can pick your Doctor and then watch it, and then 2 or 3 episodes and get the flavor of it. And then, I really dig this. But I think everyone gravitates to maybe the Doctor that they grew up with. Quite a few generations, from even now, if you're talking about David Tennant, people who've grown up with him because it's been a while. But we're stretching back to 1963, so your parents would know their Doctor, and your brother and your sisters and all that. But I mean, for yourself, what was the kind of era or the Doctor that really kind of like resonated with you, or you've been revisiting recently?
Well, I've tried to revisit one of each Doctor. I was trying to think what my first experience of Doctor Who was, and I think what it was is my nan bought me a calendar which she got with like one of the tabloid Sunday papers, probably, and it was a different picture from Doctor Who. Maybe it was a 20th anniversary or something, and I think it was up to Colin Baker at that point. So basically, I just had these pictures of these guys like on January, it would be a picture of a doctor, and that's fine. It's just a handsome guy in a handsome suit. Fine. The next one would be a monster that would absolutely terrify me because I've not seen the show. I remember the Yeti being on there and just being absolutely terrified by this image, and it was on my bedroom wall, and that was what I had, you know. Um, but I did start watching it in the Colin Baker. I keep saying Bacon. Why do I do that? Am I thinking
You
of
got food in
Kevin
your
Bacon? I
mind.
think it sounds like Kevin Bacon. That's why Colin, and that would be easier because obviously there's been two Bakers that have played the Doctor, and Colin is the
Yes.
least, the lesser famous of them. Bless him. But we were. I remember watching the character of Syl, who is like a sort of bug-like creature, and he's a villain, and he's in an episode called. This is where I'm gonna forget. Well, he's in two stories, so I may have actually seen him in Trial of a Time Lord, which is a very very long one. But I do remember watching Syl and thinking that's a really unusual thing. I've not seen that effect, and it's very good actually. It still holds up now, the suit and everything. So Colin Baker was the Doctor, and I remember very much loving the kind of cliffhangers at the end of each episode. So you get half-hour episode and an ending which looked like the main character or the companion was about to die, literally about to die, or was dead in some cases. And then you'd watch the next week to see how they got out of that. And then, although I wasn't a massive fan at that point, when do remember it regenerating into Sylvester McCoy, and I think a lot of people say this, hating the fact that it was a different actor because I didn't like the change. But then Sylvester McCoy was my Doctor, so when I was sort of like 7 to 9, he was my Doctor, and I was in a gang at school, or there was a little gang at school. We didn't do anything terrible, but we were just in a little gang, and the idea of if you were hard enough to be in this gang, you'd stayed up and watched Doctor Who because that was the scariest thing you could watch as a
Wow.
7-year-old. And I remember
Interesting.
the end of Time and the Rani, which is not a particularly well thought of episode, but it's the first one that Sylvester McCoy's in. The ending absolutely petrified me. Where there's this weird ball of energy, which is if you get sucked in this ball of energy, it goes up to the cliff tops and explodes, and then your dead skeleton falls down to the floor. And that happens to someone early on in the episode. And then Mel, the companion played by Bonnie Langford, who is actually going to return to the show in the
Oh,
15th with the 15th Doctor, she gets trapped in this ball at the end and starts going up. And I was like, well, this she's going to die. She's going to die. And I remember really being terrified by those cliffhangers, but also loving them. My mum would sort of go, well, you're not watching that again. I'll be like, no, I've got to watch it again because I want to know what happens. Um, but I think that was really the era that I got into it.
that
What
was
about you? Was it a bit
yeah.
later for
Well,
you?
I think actually I kind of went a bit ahead of behind. Well, just before my time, I kind of gravitated to the Doctor was because you hadn't even seen the episode, but there was this just strong iconography of the other Baker, Tom Baker, and I think
Yes.
that's what really put it onto the map in the US as well. Even
Yeah.
though there was no like this World Service or maybe back then, but it kind of really translated because he had a quite a long run. We're talking about
Mm.
7 years, and it was
The longest run, I think. It
I
must be,
think
yeah.
so. I think so. And he was, I think, on the back of like John Pertwee, who proved quite a, let's say, the dandy Doctor. Let's say I can say that phrase because it's one of
Mm.
his own incarnations does refer to him as the dandy, but it is very much of the. So John Pertwee was more of the era of the 70s because I've been rewatching it and you can just see the change in time and tone and what your heroes are dressing up as. But he was replaced obviously by Tom Baker, but there is a immediate charisma and otherworldliness. I mean, if
Yeah.
you're going to portray an alien, but someone affable and quirky and knowledgeable and all these many traits. I've got to say credit to Tom Baker is that one that personified that, and it just tried. So I kind of discovered him after his run. Ironically, it's kind of like,
Yeah.
but it was like you knew there was something just so fascinating about it, and there's just a glee in his performance. But you had some very dark stories. I mean, the strength of the BBC series, I think, for Doctor has been his production design. I think you didn't need to really push onto the effects so much because you had such a great costume department. Of course, huge costume dramas or in BBC on that budget, and this used it really well because you have so many historical dramas or Victorian era dramas, and the costumes are absolutely phenomenal. So that's basically the special effect. Yes, for Tom Baker, for me, that's when the huge merchandising took off. It's the K9 and everything like that. To get a grips on the whole era, I was kind of me just personally revisiting when they do their kind of like periodic anniversary where maybe all the doctors would meet in to face a common foe. So I did actually, in a kind of way leading up to this 60th, I did watch the Three Doctors. I think that's Pertwee, Troughton, and Hartnell, and it's them against usually one of their own in-universe Gallifrey and Time Lords, or one of their masters. They're always kind of like their biggest foe is basically their own race because they have such northern mastery over time and space. So it's always it turns to always internal politics, but they looking at their own value system. But it's a great, before the age of Marvel, where you had these all big crossovers. It kind of almost started there, where you had this big crossover of the previous incarnations in a kind of a team up. So I did see the Three Doctors. That was pretty good. I gotta say, it was pretty exciting as a kid to watch that. And then I did move on to, I think, Five Doctors and so forth, and then we had the 50th anniversary. But it's a good look at the whole how each actor's put their own imprint, because it's one of those concepts that's given its longevity is because it's how do you replace a leading role, and you just have this concept that he regenerates, and that's why we've had this whole era, and they put their own imprint on it based on the time they're in and when it was made.
And this is kind of accidental, isn't it? Because William Hartnell, out of the original 4 actors that you have on the show, William Hartnell is the last person standing. So the companions leave first, Susan leaves first, then Ian and Barbara, the school teachers. And Hartnell has new companions, and there's certain episodes where I watched for Hartnell Dalek. Well, I watched the colorized Daleks episode, which maybe we talk about at the end when we talk about the 60th anniversary celebrations. But I watched Dalek Invasion of Earth. Both of those stories were turned into films with Peter Cushing, sort of adapted. But he's not in one of those episodes because he'd injured his back during the filming of the previous week's episode. And the thing is about this, although they were recorded, they were sort of done like live TV. So unless something major went wrong that had to be reset or they had to have an edit point, it was done like live TV with cuts in camera at the time, which is why there's so many line fluffs and Daleks banging in scenery, because that was standard for the time, like live TV. But because this has always sort of gone back and forth, I think, between pushing the boundaries of what you can do, and then because of the way that it's funded, struggling for a bit of money, and then maybe getting a little bit better and struggling for a bit of money. And it goes back and forth. I think in the 60s, it's kind of making the most of, we can do this in black and white. We can do this in studio. We've got all these sets, and it's kind of quite good for its time, But when Hartnell gets iller and iller, it comes back for series 4, and he's in the final story that he does, the 10th Planet. He's not in the 3rd episode because he's too ill to appear, so they have to do a last minute rewrite. And then he falls down very ill at the end of the 10th Planet, and his face glows, and he turns into Patrick Troughton. And the point is, I suppose, is that there was no point in recasting for somebody of the same age, because you could conceivably have the same problem again. I mean, when it started, they didn't realize it would be the hit that it was. Dalek Mania in the 60s was a big thing, and suddenly they've got a huge show that's run for 3 years, doesn't look like it's going to stop, but the actor's getting very old. He was old to start with. So they go the other way and go, right, let's go for a younger guy. Let's get Patrick Troughton in. And he kind of plays it completely differently. He fills in the same role in the drama, but he's much more playful. He plays the flute, and he's more animated, so he's doing a lot more of the running that Doctor Who's famous for that William Hartnell couldn't do. And that continues with each regeneration, that they then go for someone deliberately each time that hasn't been like that. Well, should probably say as well that a lot of the 60s stuff doesn't exist. So Troughton's one that I haven't really watched that much of, because not much of it exists, and apparently only a third of his stories exist in their entirety, because at the time, it was just keeping film was a big thing back then, and the BBC didn't really understand that once they'd shown it once and then repeated it, that they had no concept there would be a home video market or UK Gold or anything like that. So they just ditched episodes, and some of them may exist out there. We might find more.
Apparently, the only footage of that regeneration from Patrick Troughton from William Hartnell only existed because they put it on loan to Blue Peter at the time, and the BBC had wiped the originals. The Blue Peter actually said, "Oh, we still got ours." So I said, "Oh, could we have it back?" So it's. But I mean, credit to Patrick Troughton for actually. I mean, because it really rides on him whether it continues or not. Is that massive? Is that audience acceptance or not? And I think because he bridges it so well. I mean, he's younger, but he's still kind of like playful older gentleman, and it kind of like without him, without bridge, then you wouldn't know if the audience were able to accept it or
accept him. And I think the other key for that is that you have the same companions, that you manage to see that through the eyes of them. So the first episode is them going, we don't accept that this guy is the Doctor, and that really helps the audience, because the audience are in the same place, I think. And that hasn't been the same for every regeneration. So throughout the 60s, it's all in black and white, and it's going off to alien planets and things. Once you get to the 70s, it goes into colour, and you get John Pertwee. But the end of the War Games, the last Troughton episode, he regenerates, but you don't see what into. And the next one in the 70s in colour starts Spearhead from Space with John Pertwee falling out of the TARDIS, which has crash landed. And there is then also the conceit that he is, or the sort of plot idea is, that I can't remember the reason actually now, but he's earthbound now, so the TARDIS doesn't work. I think. At the end of the War Games, he's been on trial.
They restricted him, not for budgetary reasons. No. But the Gallifreyan time was a restriction to this only Earth, and then he becomes their special agent of the kind of like.
So he's working for UNIT at this point, and this is a way of cleverly. This is again a budgetary thing that they can't afford to, or they don't feel comfortable enough to go and do these things in colour, and it's not going to look great. I don't know if there was maybe budgetary cuts at the time, but they go, well, we can do this Earth-based and we can make this work. And he's kind of much more of that sort of, there was a UK Avengers, wasn't there? There was those kind of shows like with Honor Blackman and stuff. He's kind of like that. He's a little bit Bondy, isn't he?
Yes.
The John Pertwee Doctor. It's kind of being suave, driving around in is it Betty, his car, and
Betsy,
being
or
Betsy,
and
Betty,
he's got his gadgets. He loves his gadgets. It's kind of Bondish, and he's got his kind of velvet jacket, but just driving around and all around the military base, because he's kind of their advisor.
Yes.
So, and with a sideline in Martian judo, which he at every opportunity he brings out to the floor, which is quite funny.
So he's a bit more of an action star, and
very much an action, karate action. Yes, yeah.
And I actually saw a lot of Pertwee growing up, and I couldn't quite work out why I'd seen so much of him and not Baker. And I'd seen a lot of Hartnell on UK Gold. I think though they certainly used to repeat it on BBC One and Two. I think at the point it was axed in 1989. They probably thought there's still a fan base. Let's start rerunning these, but we don't want to rerun the black and white ones because they're black and white and a lot of them don't exist. We'll start with Pertwee, and they were probably planning on continuing that. So I used to watch this quite religiously, really, and they probably just never got to Tom Baker. Maybe the repeat ratings weren't good enough or whatever. But I remember distinctly watching, and I think maybe at that point some of the Pertwee ones were lost. They're all recovered now. But I remember watching a lot of Pertwee back in the day, and then you get Sarah Jane Smith, the companion that links him and Tom Baker as well, who's a very well.
I did watch the bridge episode between them when because I was
Yeah.
trying to focus on the regeneration part because I thought it was
Yes.
best
Yeah.
of both worlds. So I did see. Again, it's this huge amount of rubber spiders which seem to plague the Doctor in every single incarnation up until now. But there it was a lot of. But I mean, it almost plays like a little horror, like a little dramatic horror show, like another scene like Tales of the Unexpected, which is people that era would know what that refers to. But it is a very much a talking spiders, people under control, mind control. Again, a lot of tension, and for a small child, it is that's why he got his reputation of
Yeah.
hiding behind the sofa because it's played like a drama, but a very, very suspenseful drama, a very dark drama. And I mean, when we go into it later, but Doctor Who, he did even get into trouble about some aspects.
Some.
I think
Yeah.
even well, we're going with Tom Baker. I think there was an episode where on a cliffhanger where
Yes. Yeah.
drowned under
Yeah.
water and then it froze on that. And then people or kids will have to wait for a week because they just saw him being drowned in water. This is probably why in the UK that we had a campaigner, Mary Whitehouse, who
Yeah.
actually
She was not happy about that episode.
and she was a bit of the bane of BBC or any kind of like. But I think maybe on this she had the right call, as in you can't have kids being traumatized for a week, seeing the hero being drowned for a week, and you've got to have some kind of limitations or kind of curfew on what you're doing, which is probably the right call in that one. But it did go in some really dark places. If you saw it.
I've always kind of liked as well. I mean, as I've got older, I do like kind of crazy sci-fi and I like big fantasy. I'm more into that stuff, But when I was younger, I really needed everything to have some grounding. So I think actually the Pertwee stuff and the McCoy stuff, which maybe that was because of budgets, that really worked for me because I was in a world that I recognised, but there were these fantastical elements. So there were things that you could almost, as a kid as well, imagine that happening. So things that they did, which on one hand I can see how they're quite inventive, and on the other hand I can see how they're possibly irresponsible. But one of the things you had in Pertwee's era, and it come back for the first Eccleston story, is the Autons. Now the Autons are shop dummies, mannequins essentially, that just come to life and start shooting people. And I think particularly in the second Pertwee appearance, they shot a police officer. And I think that was the thing that was one of the issues where someone said they shouldn't be shooting police officers. Or I think a police officer turned out to be an Auton
Yeah.
or something. So people were saying, well, we want people to, children to trust the police. We don't want them to think they're going to rip their faces off and be monsters.
Yes.
But it really helped, I think, some of that stuff. A lot of it's set in English villages as well. I definitely had on VHS back in the day Terror of the Autons, and I need to go back and rewatch that because I will probably remember it so vividly when I watch it. And the demons as well, which was like there was this weird sort of demon monster. It was probably a big paper mache thing, and then there was a guy a little bit like the Weeping Angels actually, that you think he's a statue and then keeps running around and turning into this sort of like demon thing with its mouth sticking out. But I remember it just being very creepy, but again kind of loving it. And although there is something about it being scary, and particularly maybe an argument for the cliffhangers, there are lines about that in the Russell T Davies era. I think there's one called Tooth and Claw with, I think it's David Tennant's second story, and it's quite intense. There's like a werewolf transformation scene in that. But Queen Victoria says something about stories, horror stories are good for the blood. She says they sort of give you a fright and they give you the same. And I think that is the appeal. Some people just don't watch horror, do they? And I'm very aware of this. That I've got friends who love film and TV, but they don't watch horror, and so I just don't recommend them any horror ever. Even if I see something that I think is quite mild, I know they're not going to watch it.
I mean, horror
But
genre did kind of like fit into the UK because we had the Hammer House and all that. It kind of
yeah,
fit
yeah,
within our budget range. A lot of drawing rooms and acting of kind of like very suspenseful. So it kind of fit. I mean, in that era, it fit a great, good TV budget, and it played to our strengths. It's almost like the greater the budget, the more removed it is from the familiar Doctor Who
mm,
concept and format that we kind of like. Almost. But we'll
yeah.
talk about that bit.
But I think the appeal of horror though is kind of like it's sort of similar to like the appeal of comedy in a way, or maybe it's the opposite of that, that you got a release and it's a happy release, but almost confronting some fears and thinking maybe it's not as bad as that. It sort of does get the blood pumping in the way that a really good action movie does or something. And I think even at a young age, you do recognize that you like I say, I was always terrified. I'd always have nightmares. I didn't hide behind the sofa because that would involve pulling the sofa out from the wall, but I would always be terrified and I'd always want to watch it again next week. And that was just the deal. But
Yeah,
I think you're right that we then get to Tom Baker, who is for many people, I think if you say Doctor Who, that's the first person that they think of. And he's also the only classic actor to come back in the 50th anniversary.
yeah, yeah.
So
Same.
I
I mean,
think they would.
his iconography is actually. I mean, even in The Simpsons, they kind of like they was it's the long scarf, it's the hat, and then the long coat. And even if you've never seen Doctor Who, well, who is that? But then, oh, that's Doctor Who. Oh yeah. It is that complete icon. But I mean, well, I just have to. Of course, there was Peter Davis took over from Tom Baker, so I'm getting reflective of that era. I mean, it was for me. It didn't really. It was more of a bland one. I mean, considering that big shadow of Tom Baker, but
It does seem strange. I mean, I think Peter Davison's a great actor, and he was big in All Creatures Great and Small
yeah,
because
sure.
I was sort of watching a thing called Tales. No, not Tales of the Time. The 60th anniversary documentary, which is just looking at the classic era Doctors, and I forgot that he was on that and then got cast as Doctor Who. In a way, it seems like he's not eccentric enough, but I suppose in the shadow of Tom Baker, if you want to go the opposite.
Yeah.
Peter Davison is the opposite to what just come before. I think I never really watched Peter Davison because at the point it was Colin Baker, he was the old Doctor. So actually, I've probably seen even less of Peter Davison growing up than I had of Tom Baker. He does have a very good episode or story called Earthshock, though, which is the Cybermen. The Cybermen now speak like Darth Vader because it's 1985 and Star Wars, the original trilogy, has just come out. And that's kind of odd, but the new design is fantastic. I think it debuted under Tom Baker, but that story ends with the quite a rare occurrence of the death of a companion and sort of a final black screen. And I think that was as a result of there being too many companions. They decided they had three and it was too much, so they decided to kill one. But
Adrian or something. Yes,
Adric,
very,
yeah,
very, very solemn. And I think it
yes.
was a Cyberman. Spoilers. They're allergic to gold, apparently, or gold dust, and I think they get. I think that it kind of like ends that way, or he sacrifices himself to save the day. But companion, yeah, completely lost. I did remember that I think when it comes to the end of his run, I think another sad episode. I think it's the caves of again. I think it
Juan
involves spiders
Tizani,
or
yes,
something,
of course, yeah.
and I think he has to save his companion, but he has to get this antidote. But he only got one antidote. He's been poisoned, so he gives it to the companion. And I think it ends with his last words is the name of the companion he lost, which is very touching, as in can holds on to that memory. The ones he
Mm.
lost is like,
And
he
that story, I think, was voted when there was 200 episodes. That was voted the best, certainly classic story of all time. It might have even been the overall one at that point.
very
It's a
touching.
really well considered one. I rewatched this and I thought as well it was quite grown up. Like people are getting obviously there's not blood and things, but people are getting shot with proper machine guns with
Yeah,
blanks in and stuff. And that ends on a cliffhanger where you think that the Fifth Doctor has just been murdered and Perry have both been murdered by a machine gun. It then turns out they are clones. So we are doing spoilers in this, sorry.
of course.
But it there's something about just the general tone and the kind of detail and the plot stuff and the acting where it really feels like, oh yeah, this is coming just after sort of 2000 AD and all those British comics, and it feels like it's maybe got a bit of that has been absorbed into it, and maybe the people who've grown up with it at this point, it's about 20 years old. To keep them interested, they've made it a bit more grown up. The argument is then that you lose the children and they're not watching it because it's a bit of a grown-up
guess
thing. But I thought it was a really impressive story. It obviously looks dated. It obviously looks at its time, and I think in the 80s as well, it's starting to not be able to keep up with these big things like the big Spielberg films, Indiana Jones films, Star Wars, particularly Back to the Future, even by 1985, that suddenly this budget just isn't cutting it. And I think that's a big part of why it does get axed in 1989. I don't think that really gets emphasized enough.
I think it was I think it was Lou Grade, because he goes on record saying he really did not. I think he'd actually worked on some American shows, and then he became a controller of BBC, and he worked on TV networks. And he said he was just actually embarrassed by Doctor Who series, especially on the back of all these, when you've got all these big movies, you've got the Spielberg movies, you've got the Star Wars movies, and then you've got this, and we just did not have the budget to really match this on any level, and it looks embarrassing, so that's why they kind of quietly just put it to bed. They didn't say. I think they tried to say it ends, but then there was such a public uproar. They quietly just said he will return at some point in the future, but they basically have put it to bed.
Well, this is the weird thing. For the first time since they had to recast mid-series with Hartnell, that the Caves of Androzani is the second from last story of that season. I think is season 21. I'm not sure. I can't remember now. But the final story of that season is the Twin Dilemma with Colin Baker. And so Caves of Androzani, he regenerates into Colin Baker. In that list of 200, Caves of Androzani was the most popular story, and the Twin Dilemma was the least popular story. So that's not a great way to start your run. But you can't help but feel sorry for Colin Baker, because he's coming at a point where he then does one series, I think, and then they try and axe it. And they do axe it, I think, for a year, or they bring it back, and then there's certain restrictions on it because they do the Trial of a Time Lord series. So the whole season is one big story where the Doctor's on trial, and then it goes off again for a little while, and then they say, if we're going to bring it back, we're going to recast as well. And Colin Baker wanted to do a third and final series, or maybe even more. So he doesn't come back for the regeneration scene. The start of Time in the Rani is Sylvester McCoy in a blonde wig, and they turn him over and then sort of do some face stuff on that. I mean, the budget thing, growing up, again, my memory is just to being terrified of the show. But I think when it comes back with Sylvester McCoy, there are a lot more Earth-based stories. And I think, particularly in the last one, Survival, that's really, to me, symbolizes the problems with the show now, because the script is really, really good. And I think the cast really good. And the effects are just terrible. They just can't they just don't have the money. But the seeds of the reboot, I mean, obviously there's an attempt to reboot it in America that we'll talk about as well. But the seeds of what Russell T Davies done are kind of set, I think, in those, particularly the last two McCoy series, that you've got the character of Ace now played by Sophie Aldred, and she's very much like a sort of streetwise kid. Yeah. She's got, a lot of the Doctor's companions up to this point, even Bonnie Langford, who's a really good actress, the character is not written as a 3D character, and she does a lot of screaming. I'm sure they will correct that in the upcoming series and make her a more rounded character, because she's a really good actress. But with Sophie Aldred's Ace, they really make her almost like the focus of it. They make Sylvester McCoy a lot darker and a lot more sinister. Like he might be hiding something from us.
It just remind me, funny you mentioned, it just remind me of the kind of like the character and the companion relationship that we got in the Chris Eccleston and the Matt Smith, where it's kind of like, well, she calls him Professor in this one, but she's kind of more streetwise.
Yeah.
Right? And then he's kind of, it's kind of.
And they describe it as like he's an uncle. It's very much like an uncle niece relationship, which actually it starts with the grandfather granddaughter sort of relationship. So there is something. He's got a very. I still think he's really underrated. I think I've even heard things where he sort of puts himself down, but I think he's got a real. He's got the eccentricity there but he's got the props, the umbrella. I used to love walking around with an umbrella as a kid, thinking I was Doctor Who. Apparently, the hat was his idea. He just turned up with a hat, and they went, "I'll keep that." He used to have this. It is iconic, but he used to have like all these question marks on his blazer. I think he said he didn't want that, but they forced him into it. And then he's got darker coat in the final season, which really suits. But you've got a lot of Earth-based stories as well, and this companion that's a much more rounded streetwise character. And I think when you look at what they did with Eccleston and Billy Piper, you can really see it. They took that and went, "This is the way to kind of make this work if we're going to make this work." But in the meantime, we get it goes off air. The adventures continue in comic strip form for many years, and the new adventures, a new companion, Bernie Summerfield, was written into the novels and the comics. And I think Big Finish later actually adapted or wrote from scratch what was intended to be the final BBC season, the 1990 season. They developed those into audio dramas. But in 1996, we get an attempt at a reboot. It's always called the movie now, the TV movie. But it was a co-pilot with the US, and the idea was the X-Files is massive. Let's co-fund this with the US. The BBC get the say on the Doctor, the casting of the Doctor, and it'll be an Englishman, and it'll be a British actor, and they go for Paul McGann, which is a brilliant choice. And then the show is going to be quite American. You don't like Paul McGann, no?
I got to say, he's just done us. There's nothing wrong with him in that. I think that TV movie, it's like someone has just been given the first 3 lines of what the concept of Doctor Who is, and that's all you got to go on. You've got to make a movie about this. Okay, we'll do that.
You are right. Do you know what? I used to be a lot harsher on this. I think going back to it, because I had it taped off the telly back in the day, and then I bought it when it came out, and I watched it so many times that I rewatched it, and now going, oh, it's okay because this was a blip, and then we got it back. I mean, there's things in it. It's very much of its time, isn't it? So there's a lot of bad wannabe T1000 special effects of that liquid metal effect that everybody did, even when it doesn't make sense in there. And then, like I said to you, Eric Roberts is just playing the Terminator at one point.
Hardest working actor
black leather jacket. He even knocks on the window. I know it's in a hospital, but it looks like he's doing that scene. And it's quite gory as well in places. It was actually cut by there was some really weird thing, like the BBFC, they wanted a 12 certificate, and then the BBFC said it must be, you've got to cut it for a 12. And then there was some legality, I seem to remember, that they said you can't broadcast the uncut version and then release the cut version. It has to be the same. And they had to broadcast the cut version. That's the version that's on iPlayer as well. It's cut. So when Bruce, played by Eric Roberts, he breaks people's necks, you don't really see it. He puts his hand up and then they fall to the floor. But there was a lot of kind of gory stuff. There was a lot of gory stuff with Sylvester McCoy's character dying. And there's like a big motorcycle chase and stuff. But it feels like those sort of well budgeted 90s TV shows that were a bit rubbish.
It's like trying so hard to be cool. That's what really kind of goes up a grade. Like, hey, I'm sexy and cool. And will they, won't they? Oh, the companion is like, oh, for God's sake. Really, it's so.
It does have a few lines as well, you know, like Richard always says about that line in at the end of Fantastic Beasts 3 when someone says, "I couldn't have done this without you," and that person hasn't done anything, and it's like literally they've just gone. What do people say at the end of films? They say that. We'll put it in. It doesn't actually, and she has a couple of lines that they've given her. The companion of Grace, Daphne Ashbury. I think it's quite good in it, but where it's like, that doesn't really make any sense what she's saying. It just sounds cool. It sounds like a cool line to say, so they've put that in. But they were desperately trying to sell this to an American audience. As well, the Daleks, when I recorded this off the telly, I missed the pre-credit sequence, short pre-credit sequence. And the Daleks exterminate the Master. And they sound weird. They haven't got the technology to do the Dalek voice, so they sound like they've just sucked a helium balloon and gone exterminate.
Isn't that where actually you see Sylvester McCoy, his Doctor, being actually shot in that?
So that's another thing that's cut is the companion can't think what the young guy's name is, but he starts and he's with two friends. They both get shot in the uncut version. In the other one, they just disappear, and Sylvester McCoy gets shot, and which doesn't really make any sense. It's like, well, where did they go? So they made a few edits to it, but yeah, I think even I was pleased to see him back, but Sylvester McCoy said he shouldn't have been in it. And when it comes to the reboot, and I really love how Russell T Davies is very hands-on. You get the feeling that he would just give interviews on Doctor Who forever. He just loves it. When they did the Confidential show, which was the making of show afterwards, he just said, look, I'd love to have had Paul McGann at the start of the reboot, but you can't expect a new child watching this to follow a character for 10 minutes and then they die, they get hit by a bus, and then it's Chris Eccleston. You've got to think of it as a new program. And he was right, So I think that informs it when it comes back, I think, and it's definitely got more UK sensibility.
So I did not like you hinted at. I did not like that Paul McGann iteration. However, it's when in that precursor, 50th anniversary. We're jumping a bit here, but it's kind of like it does chronologically almost. It's before the War Doctor. It's before the 50th. There's a 10-minute little short with Paul McGann reprising his role and how he transforms into the War Doctor, which comes to 50 hours of John Hurt. But it's so written so well. He's mature, he's comfortable in the role, he's everything you want to be. And I'm thinking, good God, if only we'd had him then now as this Doctor. And it's perfect.
You might do, because have you heard this rumor that Disney Plus are looking, because Disney Plus are co-financing the show now in 2023, and they're looking at ways to exploit the franchise, as they obviously would, and what spin-offs they could do. And there is apparently serious talks about doing the missing Paul McGann years, but doing it.
He's the right
and you actually go with him as an older guy and just doing it. It kind of makes sense, because we don't know how long he stayed as the Doctor for. You could actually do that and do it from a very not do the tone of the 96 TV movie, but do a sort of completely different tone.
Lessons. But he was just, even that 10-minute little episode, it's just absolutely, if only we had that. So no, it's not.
And that was a great thing that they did for the 50th anniversary, because I think nobody really knew that was coming, and then they almost just dropped it on iPlayer, and it was like, oh wow, we thought this was the only time that we saw him, and now we go back and get this extra little bit of him. And he has actually, last year was in the Jodie Whittaker finale as well. So it's been good to have him back.
Should we talk about the 50th anniversary? That was 10 years ago now. What do you
should we do the should we go in that chronological then? Should we do the War Doctor? So we've always I was saying that at that point Russell T Davies didn't want to show Paul McGann generating into Christopher Eccleston. Incidentally, there is a panel that is shown. So they drew this for the comics, that there's always been a comic strip in Doctor Who Weekly, and Russell T Davies said, do you want to show it in comics? So they drew it as part of the final Paul McGann comic. But then there was an issue that you're not allowed to show one Doctor before the other. They've got to appear on screen first before they, you can't debut the Ninth Doctor before he's been on TV, and you can't show Paul McGann afterwards. So the panel exists, and if you buy the graphic novel, they've got it, but it wasn't published at the time. But we assumed that Paul McGann did generate into Christopher Eccleston. When we get to the 50th anniversary, we discovered that there was an incarnation in between, which is the War Doctor, played by William Hurt. So, I mean, this does tie in. Oh, yeah, sorry, John Hurt. I want to say William Hurt. But, I'm thinking William Hartnell. I wouldn't say William Hartnell.
I was actually shocked, because I thought, no way. It's actually drawn up as a.
It was a draw. Yeah, it was. It's great way to shock someone in a show that's full of shocks, to go, oh my God, I didn't see this coming. It was,
I went to see it at the cinema, actually. It was a bit, I gotta say, it was one of those perfect kind of. It's the hardest trick to pull. I think it was the era of Matt Smith at this point. He was actually.
Yes, it was. Yeah.
So we'd already had the reboot already in the works with Eccleston, Tennant, and Smith, obviously. But it was already riding on quite a high. But then, how do you not screw up? Which is the biggest challenge of all. a 50th anniversary landmark case, and you've got to observe the past and all that. And I've got to say how he pulled it off. He's one of those. He was probably proud to this day, actually, that he actually pulled off that writing assignment. Quite honestly, so John Hurt, you've got Matt Smith, and you've got David Tennant, who seems to be quite a good mainstay and bouncing between two doctors. So, and of course, as you hinted, a bit of a surprise appearance by Tom Baker himself, obviously. So
which would have been a surprise if Tom Baker hadn't blurted it out in an interview to Chris Evans like 3 days before. But it's it was nice to have him back as the curator, the mysterious curator at the end. It really delivered on the effects. We also got a little glimpse of the upcoming Doctor at that point, Peter Capaldi.
Oh yes, his eyebrows.
Where you just see his eyebrows as a little thing. The other thing that really worked very well for this is it's sort of the start of, well, I suppose it'd been there, but they really took advantage of the social media thing. So the 50th anniversary happened to be on the Saturday, which is when Doctor Who was always broadcast at the time, which hasn't happened for the 60th anniversary. So they've done something slightly different. But the idea of calling it the Day of the Doctor, and then that was kind of the thing of this is the Day of the Doctor. It was sort of a title that made sense in universe and sort of from afar as well, from a sort of acknowledging it as a fictional thing. So it was a really bit, and like you say, that this is towards the end of Matt Smith's third tenure, so it's really at a high period. I think as well, they did talk to Eccleston about coming back. He probably wishes he did, because he went and did Thor: The Dark World, and apparently didn't have a great time doing it. Nope. But this was at a point where he didn't really want to talk about Doctor Who, but he did apparently meet Stephen Moffat to consider it, and he read the script. And I think that's where the idea for the War Doctor come in. But the thing at this point is that although we've had those specials, the 3 Doctors, 5 Doctors, even with the 5 Doctors, William Hartnell is played by William Hartnell's Doctor is played by a different actor because William Hartnell's passed on. And I think they realised that obviously all these actors are getting older now, so you could bring them back, but there's a problem. But there's also a problem in the story that if they'd have done the 11 Doctors, it just would have been too much. So the idea of just getting getting Tennant back with Smith, having them as double act, and then having John Hurt sort of seemed like a masterstroke, really. And it's still consistently voted one of the favorite episodes of all time. And if I have a look at my 60th anniversary thing of issue of Doctor Who magazine, it is in the top 10 at number 5. So very popular. Very popular.
Oh, yeah. It's it was just a masterstroke of play between an older version of the Doctor. It could got that because you've got so many different aspects of the gravitas and a kind of very solemn figure. But then you've got this, as we had the reboot with a more playful, younger, vibrant Doctor. So I mean, we'll veer to the when Eccleston started. It'd been how many years since the began? It was 696. I think that TV movie.
So it's been on. So at this point, it's been off air for 9 years. But I mean, in 2004, there was a lot of fuss about them filming it because obviously, I think the other thing is with the '96 movie, it's a really difficult franchise to do one episode of and go, this is what Doctor Who is, because I think the thing with Doctor Who is it can be anything to an extent. You can go all over the place, all over the universe, tell different types of stories within that. So this really gave them a sort of chance to say, right, we're going to do 13 episodes. It was a big sort of deal at that point when the UK we just do 6 measly episodes of a lot of stuff, and to put quite a big budget behind it at that point. And also, it was considered a bit of a joke, this show. So when this was first announced by the papers, it was like, Paul Daniels is going to play the lead role, all these sort of like light entertainment stars. And then when they said Christopher Eccleston, who was sort of known for Shallow Grave, Let Him Have It, Our Friends in the North, really sort of heart cracker, really hard-hitting British things. And he'd been in a Russell T Davies drama called The Second Coming.
Oh yeah.
Which was, so they had a relationship, and apparently Russell T Davies said he didn't approach him. Chris Eccleston said, I'd be quite interested to see how you write your scripts for children, because obviously the idea of Russell T Davies writing this, when the thing that he was known for most of all was a series called Queer as Folk, which was sort of a landmark in gay representation in TV drama in the UK. So the idea that these very serious sort of artistes, of dramatists coming in and doing this show really made people go, oh, this isn't going to be the thing that we've been deriding since the 80s. This is actually going to maybe have something to it. Although that the sort of taking the mickey out of it went on even until it first aired, and then people got it. But I think, as great as Tennant is, I still wonder if it would have worked bringing him back, because it comes back and he's a very much a wounded character, this Doctor. So there's been a time war that has meant all of his planet and his people have been eradicated. They've died in this war, and he doesn't want to talk about this. He seems very angsty, which Eccleston obviously plays brilliantly, and he's carrying the weight of that, and it just makes him feel like a very grounded character. He also plays it without the received pronunciation accent, so he plays it in his own sort of northern accent, which is a joke in the first episode. If you're an alien, how come you sound like you're from the north? And he says, well, most planets have a north, which is a great sort of throwaway line just to deal with it. But also his costume is stripped down, that he's just got a battered leather jacket, cashmere jumper and jeans. And actually, if you were a traveller, which is what the character essentially is, then that's what it would be. And actually, to credit Sylvester McCoy, there is a line that he says in one of the DVDs that I've seen, where he realised halfway through playing the Doctor, I think through speaking to an elderly relative, that the Doctor, if he'd lived for this long, would have lost a lot of people. And that's kind of what he then latched onto, of making him this wounded character. And they really, really run with that in the very short but brilliant Eccleston run, that he's lost everybody, all his companions, everybody he's ever known. But he meets this young girl on a council estate, not too dissimilar to Ace, but Rose, played by Billie Piper, who at this point was known as a pop singer in the UK, but really proved herself as a great actress in this show, and becomes the beating heart of the show. Really, it's sort of shown through her eyes, and this works really well in terms of rebooting stuff. That for a new audience, you're the same as Rose. You're just learning about this guy at the same time as everyone else. But for the older audience, this is the Doctor, and it's a really good
POV. And I just say, what said, it's a great palate cleanser, as in it's almost a blank slate, very mysterious and very solemn and sad. He's the adult, very much the adult in the relationship, and she's this kind of like new audience of, oh, who are you? Watch this world, and I think his delivery, he kind of makes it a bit more sober. These fantastical little, concepts. But it does start, funny enough, with the Automons. It's the kind of the mannequins that come to life. It's kind of like very much grounded. It's like a mannequin you've seen everywhere, in every shop window and all that. And it's like suddenly coming. I mean, they're quite scary because of so faceless and all that. But it's kind of like the fantastical, just bridging that little gap from reality. So it makes it a bit more palatable.
I think the other thing that's really genius. So I did rewatch Rose. I was sort of going to go for the end of the world, but I went for the first episode, Rose, and it's so. I think one of the things that's really genius about it is that Russell T Davies, much as he's a fan, I'm sure he wanted to stuff this episode full of stuff. He goes, right, we're introducing a new audience to a guy who can travel in a phone box anywhere in space and time. That's enough. And it's like they've just put that in to just kind of, it doesn't run away with itself the first episode. It just gives you the basics, like we were kind of doing at the start. And even like Rose's reaction, I mean, maybe there is another one where it's done, but her reaction when she runs into the TARDIS, and we actually don't get a cut well, we do get a cut, but it's very well disguised, that she runs in and then runs out like absolutely terrified, and then runs around the box. That is how you would react. And even now, I think it's like, how many times can you do that? So sometimes I realize why they don't keep doing that, but that is how everybody would react to that. And I think when you're doing a fantastical show, you never want to lose that sort of
Sense of wonder,
groundedness that
really.
people would be, oh my god, we've not seen this before, and it doesn't. The physics of it don't make sense
But
to
I mean,
her.
I love the audience. The modern audience really just jumped on at this point. It is
Yeah.
they don't really revisit the old ones. They kind
No,
of like
and you
say
don't need to. You can jump on at this point, and this is a reboot that come out just before Batman Begins and Casino Royale really
oh, yeah.
kind of come up with that. And I think as well were all of those franchises, including this one, they rebooted because they were struggling. Like they'd almost stopped and it had ground to a halt. You know, you'd have Batman and Robin, Die Another Day, and the 1996 Doctor Who TV movie. So the idea of rebooting was made sense. You then got this weird kind of thing in Hollywood where they were trying to reboot stuff that didn't need rebooting. That I think that's stopped now, but there was that point, you know, when they did the Amazing Spider-Man, it's like, can't we just have Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 4 to close this out?
Yeah, please.
So, but they were kind of, I think, a little bit ahead of the curve on this, and it does really take a fan, but also someone who knows drama and the industry. And very much this is, although it is darker, it's very much focused for children as well. And I think even Eccleston doesn't give himself credit for this performance, that he looks like a big, grinning, excited child in the moments. And he really switches between, it's almost like sorry, my voice just went there. But it's almost like he's got like a bipolar thing going on, because there's a
Yeah.
scene where he goes, my planet's gone. He's absolutely devastated. And he goes, never mind, eh? And then sort of launches in like, we've got to get this done.
Let's go
And
to
you can see
Barcelona.
everybody.
Yeah,
You see the reactions of all the characters around him, like they feel uneasy with this, that
yeah.
he's kind of hasn't processed this trauma, and now he's just got to launch himself into this.
But it's
The other thing
kind of
that's
constantly
genius,
on the run. Yeah, he does seem to be constantly running away from himself. That's what the
Delph,
sense.
yeah, it really, I think he's almost like the most compelling performance as the Doctor. I think the other thing that's really good about this series is that you get these recurring characters, that you have Billy Piper's sort of family back home, and that so what he does in the second episode is he takes her into the future, the far future, the end of the world. And that has more special effects, I think, in that episode than the rest of the series. They just wanted a really massive one to do that with. And it ends on a really, that was the moment where I was like, this has got a lot of heart to it. Is they then go back to a street just in the UK, and they're just getting chips. And suddenly after that, it doesn't seem jarring. It just feels genuinely sad that they've seen all that spectacle and now they're kind of there. And he then confesses to her a little bit about his planet's gone and stuff, and they seem to bond a little bit. And I was like, this is odd, because you never really got a lot of this in the old series. And this is I mean, you did have moments of it, but it's a real moment of emotion that took you by surprise. He then takes her back into the past, and you go, he takes her to meet Charles Dickens, and you get a very dark episode, which had a lot of complaints at the time. Written by Mark Gatiss of League of Gentlemen fame. But after that episode, so it would make sense that he would take her forward and back to show what the TARDIS can do. He goes to take her home and realizes that he's accidentally set the coordinates for the TARDIS wrong, and they've skipped a year. And her family are like, you just disappeared for a year. We had no idea where you were. And the consequences of what he's done, which is one thing that you've never got masses of in Doctor Who. You've had it prior to this. You've had it in Genesis of the Daleks when they look at those things. But the consequences of what he has done has taken this woman away from her family, and they didn't know where they were. Gets him a slap in the face, and it feels really grand. I think those episodes are really kind of underrated.
I did
and
watch. Well, yeah, go on. Sorry, go on. Well, I did watch recently. I think it's when you do realize. I think it's a Christmas. It's probably towards the end of his run where he's actually
Christmas Invasion.
She's brought back, and then she's like, "Oh, it's Christmas." After she's back with her boyfriend, she's like, "Well, you always talk about the documentalism. We've got Christmas coming up," and she can't quite integrate back into her world when she's seen so much.
Yes,
and you say, like you say, we don't really see too much where you take these companions. He does have an effect on them, and he just changed them. I think touched again with the Catherine Tate, kind of like aspect of it, which we talk about in times that they're permanently changed, and they get. It's almost a selfish thing that he does take his companions, and then he does. The consequences on them is he doesn't really think about it, but it's a traumatic.
and this is, yeah, I think this is where it gets really interesting for me, like really delving into what this character would be in the real world. And there's a scene, I think, probably in Aliens of London, where she comes back, where she says, "Why don't you come over to my house and we'll cook dinner and drink alcohol?" And he's like, "I don't do that. I don't mix with family." And she's like, "Well, why don't you? That's a really weird thing." And he sort of goes, "Well, my life's not like that." And I think the thing with her coming back as well, it's almost like a little bit. I mean, I sort of went off to uni, and when I come back from uni, I felt like things were a little bit different because I'd had an experience that my friends back home haven't had. And I knew a lot of people that went traveling and I didn't. And I felt a little bit like that when they come back, like, oh, they've been traveling and now they're back here. And I feel like I'm maybe like they want to just be back traveling all the time, you know. And you certainly get that with her family that she feels like she wants to be traveling the universe.
Yeah.
And they feel like, oh, but we're just sort of left here now. And there's something really uncomfortable but brilliant in that observation, I think, and the parallel. I mean, I could talk about this all day. The thing that you get after that is you then get a Dalek episode, and what they do here, much like they've been doing with the Doctor himself, is they make the Dalek genuinely terrifying by not having an army, having one,
Just
and
one,
making
yeah.
it unkillable. And it really works so well. And when you watch that one back, that they suddenly there's no humor in it. They don't have any humor because humor makes it lighter, right? They even do get the sucker, which is a thing that everyone laughs at. It's a sink plunger to kill someone in the most horrific way. It probably looks a bit bad now because it's 20 years ago, but they sort of laugh and go, "What are you going to do? Sucker me to death?" And then it reaches out and crushes someone's face in CGI. And you can't imagine that if that was anything other than a Dalek, you'd get away with that at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And it really, as a massive fan, you know that I'm a massive fan of the Terminator and Alien, which are these one unstoppable things. That episode is unashamedly going, that's the template for this. We're going to make the Dalek feel like that, like
Well,
it's the thing of
yeah.
nightmares that you cannot stop. And
I was gonna.
it really works well.
I think it's probably you keep this was that old adage, a hero's only as good as the villain that he faces, and I think it's. I think credit to the Dalek and that concept. It's basically what periodically grounds this Doctor as light as it can get and as flippant about, and almost the Doctor seems unstoppable himself until he becomes, I mean, the Dalek throughout all the incarnations. They tend to be the most scariest stories. Well, even I did watch. I think they recently released the colorized version of the Daleks, which is
Yeah.
the William Hartnell episode, which I just recently saw. Looks beautiful in color, but again, it stops on quite a lot of cliffhangers where you are just this one Dalek at almost meeting someone who in a trap corridor somewhere, and the only logical conclusion that they're going to be killed, and just without any hesitation, and
And they kind of are based on the Nazis, aren't they? This
yes,
is
yeah,
the
that
thing.
design. There's a lot of
And
that
actually
iconography. Yeah,
the series, I think Russell T Davies said this, and certainly Peter Capaldi, that the show is steeped in death. And I think Capaldi said, I don't talk about this much because it's not great for the marketing of it. But it is kind of a weird property because it is sort of a children's show, but it's also got a lot of people that die. And a lot of my nightmares about, I think, growing up weren't just the cliffhangers. It was characters that would die because they're, particularly back in those days, they were just disposable. We don't need this character again. Let's just have them killed. It didn't apply to the Doctor or the companions, but the other characters that would appear. I remember distinctly in the Remembrance of the Daleks, a soldier being exterminated and being thrown against a wall, and that I found terrifying at the time.
yes. Highlight for me, I think it's the Tom Baker. I think Genesis of the Daleks is when he actually. It's one of those big conundrums of time travel. If I had the opportunity to go back and stop their creation, well, do I do it? But then if I do, everything that they impacted and influenced, all the civilizations that rose and fell because of them, that changes. And it's one of those things I can't go back and change something definitely as much as I would love to, put an end to this. So it's kind of their locked relationship between it. So it tends to be a lot of the highlights of the quandary of time travel and consequences. But anyway, well, yeah, what I was saying with Eccleston, it was, I think, a very short run. It was the Christmas episode. I think I was just watching recently where it is actually he, yeah, he's saved. I think he's poisoned or something like that, and it's radiation or whatever it is, and he absorbed a lot of it or whatever it is, and then it becomes basically a David Tennant at that point, and and he's for that episode, he's kind of like it's a Christmas episode, it's kind of asleep for a lot of the episode of he's in his pajamas, just asleep. So I mean, Billy Piper's taking him to the home, and it's just it becomes almost a family EastEnders comedy drama at that point because they've just got someone in there. A lot of it's based in her flat basically, and with her mum, and so it's
the Sycorax outfit is very, very good in that as well. I think it's quite a good makeup effect. I think at the time there was a lot of talk. I remember at the time of going, oh well, and I think because Eccleston was so great and Tennant wasn't really known. He'd done things like Casanova, and he's in Jude, the adaptation of Jude the Obscure, in one scene with Eccleston as well, and Kate Winslet. But he wasn't really a known actor, and I think people were saying, well, replacing the lead is quite a dangerous thing, forgetting that it worked under the classic era. But the idea is to sort of remove him from the drama for most of it. So again, like we were saying with Troughton, we're familiar with the other characters, and then by the time he comes back, we really kind of need him because we're in trouble without him. So it kind of I think it does work. He's definitely a lighter Doctor, and there are definitely comparisons, I think, with Hartnell, Troughton, and Tennant as well. I think he's sort of goofier in his first series and gets darker as it goes on. And I think that works quite well with most of the Doctors as well, that they often start that way and get darker. Some of them do it in reverse. Apparently Colin Baker wanted to do this, that he wanted his Doctor to be very much like the Hartnell one, that he starts off grumpy and then softens up, so to do it the other way, but he never really got a chance to realize that because they axed him before he did it. But both kind of work, I think, if you've got some kind of arc. But he's still damaged by the Time War. I mean, the thing with Rose, the Doctor, the companion, had never really been a romantic interest, and in the Eccleston series there are lines where I think the police in the Aliens of London, the police come in and say, oh, we found the woman who's been missing for a year, because that's another consequence, is they reported her to the police. And when the police are taking statements, they say, so is this a sexual relationship? And he looks mortified and goes, no, and looks really awkward. And she just looks annoyed, like, no, like everyone thinks that. And they kind of constantly have this thing of batting away, no, we're not a couple, we're not a couple. And then as the series goes on, you really feel like you really buy that there is a connection with them. You really do believe that there is a connection with them. And actually Tennant coming in, often replacing one actor when you've got really good chemistry doesn't work, but actually replacing with Tennant, who is nearer to her age, actually makes it feel like even more so that they are a couple, even though they're not explicitly so. And even to the point that there's an episode where she starts saying, are we just going to settle down? Are we going to get a mortgage and stuff like that? I think it's the Impossible Planet, and he's kind of really considering it at this point. And by this point, I think when they said this in the episode, they just announced in the press that Billy Piper was leaving. They probably knew for the whole series, but they thought, we don't want to let them know another lead actor's leaving. But it works brilliantly. The final episodes of that series, where you get a Dalek Cyberman team up, well, not team up because they're fighting each other, but for the first time, all that is set against each other. So you've got these big effects and stuff. But then it ends with this really devastating thing that they are separated in different time zones forever, seemingly. And that is, I think that's probably one of the most memorable moments of modern Doctor Who. That moment on the beach, and they even revisit it in Journey's End, and it's sort of one of those things where you go, this doesn't work as well as the original ending. I know why they wanted to bring Billy Piper back for a bit, but that final ending was so gut-wrenching, and again, I think really took people by surprise at the time.
I mean, he did then. I mean, the companions that followed, he actually did Martha and so forth. He actually, and Catherine Tate, of course. He did make quite a good. He had a different relationship. He's like, he doesn't really want a heavy relationship. He doesn't want any get in romantically involved. He just wants a mate, and it works really well. With both those companions, just a kind of like a platonic relationship, and it works
with Adjuman as well. With whose sister is Gugu Mbatha Raw as well, by the way, who I always thought they would maybe keep her on as the companion if Catherine Tate hadn't been on. He'd then go off with her sister and that would cause some tension or something. But with Martha, she really she seems to have romantic feelings towards the Doctor, but she knows he's hung up on Rose. So that sort of element of the drama in series 3 is to do with like an unrequited love, isn't it? And then she actually gets strong enough to walk off in the end of the third series, and then you get Catherine Tate back, who had been in a previous episode, and it's very much a platonic mates relationship that works really well. So he's got 3 very different companions, and they all work really well. He's of course as well got Kylie Minogue for One Christmas Special, Voyage of the Damned.
I forgot that.
Which was that was really the height of the sort of power maybe of that initial series. I think even Russell Tovey's in that episode, but it was quite a long episode, and I remember the idea of just having Kylie Minogue in a Doctor Who Christmas Special. You think this would have been inconceivable years ago because the show was a joke, and at this point you go, yeah, this is the biggest thing on UK
it was
TV.
very much the Britpop culture. It was riding that wave around that era, basically.
Well, in the UK, I was thinking this earlier. Like I got really sort of nostalgic watching some of this stuff because I haven't really watched it since. I probably watched it 2 or 3 times a week back in the day. And then I've always tried to keep up with a new incarnation. So I haven't been going back watching it. So maybe it's the first time in 13 or even longer than like 18 years I'm watching some of this stuff, but I watched it a lot at the time. And it kind of in the UK, for sci-fi fans, I think it really almost defined the late noughties in the way that the MCU did for everybody in the 2010s. Like this just seemed like the thing that you had to watch. And it was very much what Richard was saying earlier. I think it's very much tailored to a UK audience at this time. There's a lot of UK in-jokes and stuff. And there's a couple of spin-offs under this era as well that you get Torchwood, which after a shaky series 1, which has a mix. There is a sexy Cyberwoman episode, which is just an odd thing because the Cybermen, that completely goes against what they are. But I watched the start. I wasn't going to watch any Torchwood, but I watched the first episode of series 2 because I do remember that one. They've got James Masters in it, and it's at the point where they've had Captain Jack Harkness, played by John Barrowman, started in an Eccleston story, left, and then he comes back for the end of series 3. So he leaves. He disappears at the end of series 1 of Torchwood. They hear the TARDIS materialize, and he disappears, and that is linking him going into Doctor Who and then coming out again. Series 2 starts with them going, "Where have you been?" and they're operating as a 4 now. And I mean, it's extremely violent for a Doctor Who spin-off. I think at this point they started doing cuts of it, pre-Watershed cuts, because they wanted to just maximize the audience, which were ridiculous because it would cut in the middle of a shot and suddenly someone would just be covered in blood, and you go, that doesn't even make any editing sense. They didn't film alternative versions, but I think there was a mix. But that one in particular, I think there's an episode where Gwen, who is very much the Rose of Torchwood, played by Eve Miles, she's the grounding of it. It starts off with as a police officer, and then she gets sort of brought into it. There's an episode, I think it's episode 4 of season 2, where her husband works out what she does for a living, and they just have an argument. They just have like a proper blazing argument, and he's going, "I don't even know what you do." And she goes, "I hunt aliens." And there's just like a pause, and then he says, "F off." They just, and you go, that's what it would be like. Like if you're going to ground this, that's what it would be like. And she is the key to that. They then went and did a series on BBC One of over 5 nights, because they were sort of getting stripped down, called Children of Earth. And this is a very low budget. Peter Capaldi is in this as well, but not as a Doctor.
He
appears in Doctor Who and then appears in Torchwood.
Yeah.
But the idea of Children of Men, I haven't watched it for a long time. It's very, very disturbing. Is the aliens have come down and they've gone, "You need to sacrifice," I can't remember if it's 10% or 50% of your children. And there's scenes where the kind of governments are kind of working out, who are we gonna sacrifice the aliens, because if we don't, we're all dead. And it's just like the darker. I just remember going, geez, this is grim, but it's really good. It's very, very good. It's probably more it's definitely more its own thing then rather than a Doctor Who thing. And it's got little references. They then did a sort of co-production with the US, I think, again with Stars, called Miracle Day, which was season 4. And Mackay Pfeiffer from 8 Mile is in it. Um, and the idea behind it, again, this was on BBC One. I think it was in the Matt Smith era, and there's not really any crossover with Doctor Who at this point. The idea is that nobody dies anymore, and the implications that has for Earth if nobody dies, and the population just keeps going up and up and up. And that sort of ties in with Jack Harkness, the character, because at the end of the Eccleston era, he gets resurrected by TARDIS energy that Rose brings into play, and he now can't die.
Can't die.
But I would say Torchwood sort of gets better as it goes on. It's worth a little look. And then you also have a children's spin-off, the Sarah Jane Adventures on CBBC that Tennant turned up in, and Matt Smith for one episode, which was sadly that the 5th series. I think there was 6 planned stories, and Elizabeth Sladen just suddenly died in the she had a short illness and died, and they could only complete 3 stories. But I think they would have carried on with that series if it wasn't for that. But they'd attempted a series called K9 and Company after the Tom Baker years, which didn't work, and I think this was a way of rectifying that, and it worked. It was quite popular.
While we mentioned, I mean, K9 was, I think he proved so popular and a huge merchandising appeal again during the Tom Baker era, but they found out because he basically was cleverer than the Doctor and he had all the gadgets. There was no challenge. So they always found excuses of, K9, his voice circuit's broken again. He'll have to stay in the TARDIS just to give Doctor Who something to do. And actually,
he must go off with. Oh no, he does go off with Sarah Jane Smith. When did they write him out? But that's
well, even during the Tom Baker, they slowly said,
stopped using.
No, you need to stay in the because he basically just was able.
Actually, that's a good point. Yeah. With the Tom Baker one, I rewatched, I think I have seen it before, but City of Death, and I think it's quite good. I know it's the one where they go to France, but I think it's quite a good story, and it's quite a different kind of story. It's like a heist sort of thing, and it's well written. John Cleese cameo, but there's a moment where Tom Baker goes into the TARDIS and just says, "Oh, K9, how are you doing?" Yes, you never see him. You never see him. They just sort of
I think so. Episode he's just basically walking out and saying, "Oh no, his circuit's gone awry." Then I'll fix him later. But all I just saw excuses to leave him there. But yeah, like you mentioned, the City of Death. I think you recommended that, so I did watch it, and that's a very good story. Again, it's a heist, but it takes over the time of the whole history of man. In fact, this heist, or the main character, is involved in the creation of the human race because of his influence and all that. But it's big concepts, but it gets spread over, which they tend not to do, about 6 or 7 episodes, or not, on one story. I think in the later eras, it's more like one episode. They got more episodic in the David Tennant era, and even the Matt Smith era. It's more shorter, kind of like self-contained. But I kind of miss those big, long stories. But so we cover, with Tennant obviously proving quite a very popular. I mean, as you say, riding high, and then how do you follow that? Well, I think with Matt Smith, it was quite a. I think they lucked out again. It's almost very similar. They know that energy of a very young Doctor. He's almost getting younger, where he's very much very vibrant. But I think definitely with Matt Smith, he has this kind of quality of being a very old and young at the same time, which is such a great kind of contrast and kind of like a good balance between all the facets of the Doctor. So I liked his one as well. More credit to him as an actor. I mean, some of the stories started, I think, toward the end of the era. His one a bit off the boil, but it was again. I think still riding high in that era. I think, obviously.
I think I think as well, that's a really good point about him being like feeling old and young at the same time. And I think with a lot of whenever it comes up who's going to be the new Doctor Who, there's often names thrown in the ring that I go, that's a really good actor, but they're not a Doctor Who. And it's like, I think you couldn't have anybody that could play Bond and Doctor Who. Do you know what I mean? Matt Smith
Yeah.
can play Doctor Who. He couldn't play Bond. And I think that's the same for all of those performers.
The key is getting that casting right. Yeah.
Yeah, you have a sort of different dynamic again that he's traveling now with a woman and her boyfriend a lot of the time. I think, or does the boyfriend come in the following season more? I think it might just be the two of them traveling in the first series, and then the boyfriend
because you
and then
kind of like
husband
you just it could go either way with the romantic. There's always kind of here they kind of played it since post Eccleston. They kind of like this romantic, will they, won't they? But they're kind of here just about off it. Kind of like they're kind of like because she gets more focused on.
The other thing that you get right at the end of Tennant's era, set up by Stephen Moffat, who takes over from Russell T Davies. So really, the finale of Tennant and Russell T Davies was on New Year's Day 2010. It was massive, and then it comes back 3 months later, and it's basically a new show. Yeah. Although he's regenerated into Matt Smith. It's a completely different production team, in charge, showrunner, and different cast. But Stephen Moffat, who was writing under Russell T Davies, does an episode called Silence of the Library, where they introduce the character of River Song, played by Alex Kingston. And she recognises Tennant's Doctor, but he doesn't recognise her. And it turns out they're married, but in a sense of the time traveller's wife, they are not meeting in the same order. You know, they are meeting at different times in different points of life. So he at this time knows he is married to Alex Kingston. She comes back in these episodes. I remember that people were really, I mean, the first one is really impressive and is very well thought of. Olivia Colman has got a throwaway role in the first one, which seems bizarre now. But 11th Hour was really well received. The next one, I can't remember the title of it, but it's sort of a really good satire on democracy, political satire. That one I thought was really well written. You get episodes like Vincent and the Doctor where they meet Van Gogh. Bill Nye is in that episode, uncredited, and it deals with mental health, which we'd not really seen in Doctor Who before. And then I just remember the finale on this. I think the cliffhanger of the finale is everything in the universe has died. Everything has gone. And it goes to black, and there's no next time show, and you're like, what? How are they going to follow this? And this is I think the difference between Russell T Davies and Stephen Moffat, they're both fantastic writers. Russell T Davies is very sort of emotional, and he does this thing of, you really love the characters. Immediately you sort of fall in love with the characters and you want to know what they do next. Stephen Moffat, who I knew from writing for a show called Coupling, which was often billed as the UK Friends. It had 6, really attractive lead cast members, but Coupling was very much about very clever, intricate scripts, which would all slot together at the end. And you go, that it's impossible to show anybody 5 minutes of Coupling and for them to get it, because Coupling works when you watch a whole 30-minute episode. You go, oh my God, that's genius. That thing that is at the start of the episode means that at the end of the episode. And there were episodes that were split screen for the entire thing. Very, very clever, intricate writing. And I think his real strength is in the plots and the complexity of weaving strands together. And doing something as bonkers as going, the cliffhanger is everything's dead, and you go, well, what the hell is next week going to be? And then I do remember, I haven't got around to watching it yet. I'm going to, but the series 6 opener, that's the second series with Matt Smith, thinking, oh, this really feels like they found their own thing to do, because they had a pressure coming back of going, we need to make it a bit like the show that everybody knows, but we want to do our own thing. So it's sort of trying to go, this is like what you've seen before. The opener of series 6 is really running around in different timelines and not being stuck to that thing. Much as I like that, and I think that's important for the show, they really took advantage in that opener of going, right, we can jump from this timeline to this timeline and now take the TARDIS from here to there. And it wove something in that I'd not seen before. I think well, saying about spoilers, but it starts quite early on with the Doctor seeming to be shot dead as
Oh
well. And you
yeah,
go, that's quite a
that's right.
bold way to start it. And now who are we following?
Kind of
And
like
I
goes
just remember,
backwards. Yeah, it's quite a bit of a
yeah,
mind bender, that one actually.
and
Who
these
shot him,
things
and
that
then you
look
find
like the scream from the monk painting as well. I can't think what they were called, but they looked absolutely terrifying. I thought that's a really good creature creation. And at this point, it's in HD as well, which actually wasn't
yeah.
during most of
It
the
seems
other.
with every
And it starts.
incarnation the camera gets better. The camera,
Well, I think only the very final Tenant specials were in HD as a kind of way of, but the early stuff is in standard definition. So now they've got to do that, but they keep up with it.
bit more
And I
location
think
shooting as well. I mean, the
more
states. I
like
think,
yeah, really big sort of. You get the impression they're getting the ability to go abroad more and
yeah,
do
yeah.
shoots there, which is great because then you're not having to build sets, are you? You're just relying on locations. There's some really good location work in this era. Um, and you get Amy Pond. You get an episode called "Let's Kill Hitler," which is a
Mm,
hell of a title for a children's show. But I remember that being like a big thing of like,
it's a bit headline.
wow,
Yeah,
what that's
yeah.
a hell of a
Quite kind of
title.
pushing. Yeah, it's like cut, like push. I mean, sometimes you look, as I guess of a TV or a show where it's making headline news, it's pushing about, oh, we never seen, and you have to tune in to watch. And actually, for a time, it was doing this. I mean, this show, 50 odd years at that point, doing that. It's quite a credit to the writing and the creative team that you got there as the concept.
And then you
Um,
get Jenna Coleman come in as Oswald? No, that's not right.
Jenna,
Clara. Clara Oswald. Yeah,
Clara,
it
yes,
is right. Yeah.
yes,
Um,
which
very odd introduction because she's introduced as a sort of a bit of a mystery.
yes,
She
the
seems to be back in
impossible,
time, and then
the
yeah,
impossible girl, or something like that. Again, a bit of
it,
a
it
mystery, timey whammy, whatever.
it's a weird thing because it's sort of the opposite of what they did with Rose and the Doctor or
Mm,
Ace and the Seventh Doctor, where it's kind of like you identify more with the companion and the Doctor's a mystery. Suddenly, the Doctor is the one you identify, and the companion's a
she's the
mystery.
mystery, yeah.
I think by the time she left, and particularly under Peter Capaldi, she feels really grounded and really works well. But I think there was a little period of time there where it felt like the writing had maybe not helped her character when she was first introduced.
Yes,
Plus, I think people really loved the character of Amy Pond, played by Karen Gillan. I mean, what did she
very,
ever
very
go on to do?
warm,
Oh,
very, yeah, funny.
Guardians of the Galaxy is what Karen
Guardians
Gillan
of the
went on to
Galaxy,
do.
that's what
So
you know her from, yeah,
yes,
later on. Again, very good. Um, Almost at the beginning. I mean, well, they have a kind of a relationship where it's like it spans her childhood because it
yes,
becomes a
yeah.
kind of like this,
He's met her as a child. Yeah,
yeah, Mara as a child. It's a very, very intertwined relationship, and they
yeah,
have a huge warmth. But you say with Jenna Coleman, it's very, she comes with a bit of a colder character. It's harder to warm to. But then I did find a bit more touching because she's the one that bridges the Matt Smith and the Peter Capaldi era. Of course, we talked
yeah.
about they're the Doctor, but then it's it's where we kind of have a long time fan Peter Capaldi, but he's very much the older Doctor now at this time, and a very and and but it's having a bit of sympathy because it's I think because I recently saw it, it's where she's the bridge, and then he's the one lost, where she kind of like has a phone call from this Matt Smith who's already died at this point, I think, or from the
Yeah.
past, saying the
Accept him. Yeah.
face that you're looking at now is scared, and I think she does a good piece of writing. It's like fear is a companion. It makes you stronger. It makes you faster, and it's really a great lesson, a great piece of writing for any kid or child, just like what dealing with fear,
Mm.
and especially this Doctor who's a bit more tepid, more unsure of himself. Peter Capaldi, brilliant actor. If you've seen him in the thick of it, how quite a rancorous character and delivery he can be. So you're kind of expecting that kind of fiery Doctor, but here
Yeah.
it's kind of like I think it was a bit of too much of a bit of slow start for me, considering Peter Capaldi, you'd already seen him in the thick of it. So it is just waiting for him to get up to speed, which he did eventually. But it's kind of like I think it's too short to run, quite honestly. But that's what it is. I think. think it was 3
I
years,
mean,
but it went
I
very quick.
was I was really shocked when they announced. I remember this. So the point when they were bandying names around for this, I remember Rory Kinnear being
Yeah.
mentioned, thinking he's a great actor, but he's not Doctor Who. And there
Mm.
were all these names put forward,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I none of them clicked for me. And then when they said Peter Capaldi, my first thought was, but he's been in Doctor Who and he's
Yeah.
been in Torchwood, particularly in Torchwood. He's like in the whole thing, and it's a very memorable performance. I mean, the final scene that he's got is chilling, really. Um, and then you go, so he can't be in it because he's been in it, and then you go, that would be perfect. That he would be a perfect Doctor Who,
Yeah.
and it's
Yeah.
worked really well for both things. I think Eccleston and Smith weren't fans, and they don't have to be. Tennant and Capaldi are massive fans.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the other thing, I suppose, at this point, Stephen Moffat is also writing Sherlock as well, which is a massive show for the BBC.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
with Benedict Cumberbatch and
Yeah.
Martin
Martin.
Freeman. So he's doing a lot. I'm not,
Yeah.
you know, I remember being worried at that point, thinking, how can someone run these two shows and
Yeah.
writing so many episodes of them as well? I mean, I never, yeah, sometimes the writing it felt not so great in
I think they had very
this
short runs as
series.
well. I think they were kind of very. It's not like when the seasons where you have 12 earlier on. Here it was like
It might have been
six
maybe.
episodes. I think he really did actually had, as you say, writing
I,
Sherlock.
I
So
don't think
there were
they were
short
shorter. They might
runs.
have been. There was a lot of. I think there was one where it was a three-parter, and the thing with the so I think in the Russell T Davies era, you tended to have 10 stories, three of which were two-parters, so it's 13, and that kind of keeps the cost down because you're in a location for 2 episodes. And there was one that was three episode story that I just felt like they don't have the money to go anywhere else, and I'd appreciate if they just did a shorter series in a way anyway. Um, there were a lot of them are really well considered. So Heaven Sent, which is the first basically one-hander episode, um, was voted the best story of all time on in Doctor Who magazine for the 60th anniversary. I do feel there is something maybe towards that end of that Moffat series that they keep repeating. I mean, they often do, and you could say it about other showrunners as well. But there is a sort of story with Amy's husband, Rory, that he's lived through
Oh yeah,
multiple,
the
so many
Guardian
years
of
just to get this
Guardian.
done.
Oh yeah,
And that's kind of what happens in Heaven Sent, that to get out of this thing, the Doctor has to keep reliving this over and over again and just chipping away a little bit of
at
ice
this.
each time
Yeah,
he breaks
yeah,
it. And you get a montage. And I did get to the end of it and think I've sort of seen this before. It's kind of clever, but it's also like
we have
it does
seen.
feel a
Yeah,
bit
yeah,
repetitive.
sure.
I think the sort of the idea. I think Clara, played by Jenna Coleman, was going to leave and then actually decided to stay on because she was enjoying it so much. I do remember as well with Capaldi thinking when they cast him, I was really shocked but surprised that they'd gone for someone so young because it had always been someone. I mean, they were getting younger, the Doctors,
Yeah, yeah.
but they've then gone quite old
Mm.
with a casting choice, and I was impressed by that. I was also very much a fan of Peter Capaldi in the thick of it, and I couldn't imagine him not swearing for more than one line because that's a very iconic role. But he comes on, and I think he gets better. So I think it's the start of his second series. He's got like a
Mm.
guitar, and he's almost like
Yeah,
playing like an aging rock star. And you think, well, that feels like he's added a bit more of his thing to it. It doesn't
yeah.
feel like he's got enough of his own stamp on to start with. But I think
Mm.
maybe if he'd have started off with a rock guitar, I'd be like, who is this guy? You know, because he was Matt Smith a little while ago. So it's a difficult balance. His tenure ends with a story called Twice Upon a Time, where they hit on the idea of getting David Bradley to play the first Doctor. David Bradley, a brilliant actor, and he had played William Hartnell in um, ostensibly a little biopic about
Yeah,
William Hartnell for the 50th anniversary,
yeah, yeah.
about his time leaving Doctor Who. And they suddenly went, well, we could just get this guy in. And I haven't seen it for a long time, but I think it fills in the gaps of the episode that his penultimate episode that he wasn't in because he was ill. So they kind of explain away why he wasn't there. He was with Peter Capaldi at this point. So it's a really nice way of bringing that round, and for a fan like Peter Capaldi to have him playing opposite the Doctor, and we get Missy in this era, played by Michelle Gomez, is a sort of gender swapped version of the Master, and she plays that very well.
I kind of course, Missy was again a Scottish actress, but she was quite. I was thinking there was a bit of rumors about a female Doctor, and I was thinking I would love her to be a female Doctor because I think, like you said before, it just comes down to the casting. It's very hard to find the right actor for that role, and I mean, well, here in this, she's Missy. She's kind of like a version of the Master, I think, or something similar, but I'm not sure. But I was thinking, would it have been a great idea if actually she's actually the next incarnation of the she of the Doctor? Because she doesn't know. There's a bit of a mystery by her. He keeps her in a locked up for some reason for her own good, but then she's kind of like he's trying to help her, but he's very scared of her at the same time. But I was thinking, what if she turns out to be? Well, there was this concept of the Watcher, which I think came out again with Tom Baker, where the next, I think it got explained maybe in a audio version where it's the next psyche of the next incarnation of when you come to the end of your era, and you're going to regenerate to the next one. It's the version of the future one which is watching and will be your future Doctor. So I was thinking,
they have done this.
I think they did it for the Peter Davison, Tom Baker era, and I think they did it for the John Pertwee era, where I think there was this Tibetan monk who said, "Oh, I'm from the future." Oh, I think Doctor accidentally dies. He dies a bit prematurely before his regeneration. So one of the monks ends up in the sitting room and says, "Oh, well, actually, I'm a Time Lord, but I'm retired, whatever." And he says, "Well, I'll just kickstart your regeneration." I think then he kickstarts the regeneration of, I think, John Pertwee into Tom Baker. But it's that concept of your future self waiting in the wings. So I was thinking, because there was a bit of talk even then about who the future Doctor, and could it be a woman, and maybe it's about time it was. And I thought that actress was, my God, she's bang on perfect. And I think no one would have had a problem with her, quite honestly.
Do you know what, Jason? Even though you have done a brilliant segue into Jodie Whittaker, can you please allow me a little diversion just to say something?
Time. Oh, yes, go
sorry.
ahead then.
So, I can't believe I'm going to do this, but so they did a weird thing with Colin Baker as well, where in Trial of the Time Lord, that he has there's a point where they say this guy is the halfway between your 11th and 12th regeneration or something odd like that. So they have done that, and you don't have a consistent approach to regeneration throughout the classic era. I think they always want to do something new, and then I think in the newer era, in the Russell T Davies era, they said they wanted to make it exciting, so he's always stood up, because actually the John Pertwee to Tom Baker one, you think that should be the pinnacle of it, but he's just on the floor, isn't he? And they just do a basic transition. I think maybe they've put a bit more of an effect on it now. So you have had that, but at the point where Matt Smith approaches the end of his life, we believe this is all 13 generations now, because you've had the 8 Doctors that appeared in the classic era. So that's 8, obviously. 9 we now know as the War Doctor.
War Doctor, yeah.
10 is the 9th Doctor, Christopher Eccleston.
Yeah.
11 and 12 are Tennant, because the end of The Stolen Earth ends with David Tennant regenerating. So the cliffhanger of his final story, of the final story of Series 4, he sees Rose at the end of the street, runs towards her, they're reunited, and then just as they're about to hug, he gets shot by a Dalek. And then he gets dragged into the TARDIS by Rose, Donna, and Captain Jack. And and Jack says, "Get away, you know what happens next." He glows yellow and goes, "I'm regenerating," and regenerates into the camera, and it just comes up to be continued. No next time sting. this made the news in the UK. People genuinely thought that Tennant was regenerating, and everyone was like, "Look, all the old actors are back. That's to make the transition. Nobody knows who the new Doctor's going to be." When Journey's End starts, the regeneration energy stops, and Tennant is still Tennant, and he's put his regeneration energy into the hand that is cut off in the Empire Strikes Back style sword fight of the Christmas Invasion. So he is actually the 11th and 12th generation of the original, and then Matt Smith is meant to be the final life,
13.
And he gets more lives granted to him. I always thought they should have done a series without the Doctor. They should have actually done a series where his energy is being like taken, like in the TV movie, and go, "Oh, the Doctor's not here anymore," and just made it a sci-fi show, and then suddenly brought in a new actor and sort of gone, "We had a Doctorless series," or maybe one episode, but they didn't do that. And I can't really remember how he even regenerates into Peter Capaldi, because at this point he's meant to have 13 lives. He's not meant to have another one.
Supposed to. Yeah,
exactly. But he kind of jumps back in. But then this is potentially, well, no, he would be on a 13 life generation cycle, but whether Hartnell was the first Doctor or not, that's something else we come to in the next iteration of the show.
Yeah, it was a bit of a leap to try and rewrite. So suddenly now, because of the service, you've been granted another 13 generations. Like, okay. There was a bit of running tension because you're thinking, God, how many lives has he got left? And then thinking, and then it does have a weight. Every death now does, and every action becomes more weightier. And I think this is kind of like this 13th Doctor tour. It's kind of like there's always this background.
As someone I think Stephen Moffat said when they did the War Doctor thing, said the Ninth Doctor isn't really the name of the character in the show. We refer to it as the Ninth Doctor, and we mean the ninth lead actor to play the protagonist in the show rather than that. So, but it's just an extra layer of it. But so Moffat then leaves the show with Peter Capaldi, and we get the first woman Doctor in Jodie Whittaker, who had appeared alongside David Tennant in Broadchurch, and she'd been in things like the wonderful Attack the Block with
Attack the Block,
Attack the Block, which is a really good show, really good film. And a thing called Adult Life Skills, and I think she's got that. She's definitely sort of got the quirkiness. I was kind of shocked that she sort of plays it with the sort of northern accent that she does. But I mean, Eccleston did that as well, and I think it works very well for the show. She's sort of almost like a cross between David Bowie and Victoria Wood, I think, in this.
Yes.
And I do think when this started, I think, you know, that some people really don't like this iteration of the show. Obviously, there was a lot of misogyny around the time that she was cast, though I think a lot less than you would get in other fandoms. I think generally the show is a very sort of got an inclusive fan base. It's funny to see headlines about the show go. I mean, every show goes woke. That's just what everyone says about everything at the moment. But I mean, you had Captain Jack as a openly bisexual character back in 2005, so not
he had
that much
Bill
changed.
Potts also, you know,
and you had Bill Potts as well. Of course,
they worked quite a really great dynamic. It was a teacher student.
Yes, that was
and
good.
She was openly, a gay character in that, and within a second line of dialogue, and it was like, but no one blinked an eye. It wasn't really headlight. It's more like, oh well, she's quite, but it did add to the relationship, as it was just a very great. You got the older gen and then a younger lady, but then how do you do that comfortably? Well, you start on like teacher, mentor, completely platonic again because of.
They had to. There is a line of dialogue. I can't quite remember it when Smith turns into Capaldi, where they kind of assert that this is not a boyfriend girlfriend relationship, because it kind of was. It wasn't. They moved away with it from Amy Pond. They were sort of moving towards it with Clara, and then they had to backtrack very quickly, a bit like Empire Strikes Back again, when it's like, no, they were always brother and sister. What are you talking about? So yeah, you do have that different dynamic, and you've had different dynamics over the years. I think here you get I'll say I think this era of the show, that the opener is really strong, I think. And it's Chris Chibnall as the showrunner now, who was the showrunner of Torchwood. the first episode is quite dark. The Woman Who Fell to Earth, which is a David Bowie reference. It's referencing the obviously the film that he did, the Nicholas Roeg film. But the people that she meets, it's very much the dynamic is like a family now. So it's more like the sort of TARDIS teams that you got under maybe with the Ponds or the Adric sort of era of Peter Davidson, maybe even the Hartnell stuff, where you've got an older guy who's a widowed guy played by Bradley Walsh of The Chase, who's a really good actor and starred with Freeman
surprised
Agyeman.
Actually, how good he was. Actually, out of all of them, I think he was fun because we know him here more in television presenter, quite honestly. But I gotta find out the companions. He was one of the better actors out of all of them in this series, anyway.
And then you have Yasmin Gill, who was in Hollyoaks, who no, not Yasmin Gill, because that's
what's her name? Character name, isn't it?
That's the character's name. Yeah, sorry. But you have Yaz, played by an actor from Hollyoaks, and you have Toysin Cole as well. And they sort of act as a bit of a sort of disjointed family, And I think there's some really strong episodes in that first series with her. There's particularly, I think, a standout is they meet Rosa Parks in an episode with Rosa Parks played by Vinette Robinson from Boiling Point. That's a really good one. There is one in the middle that I think a lot of people just rubbed people up the wrong way. But the first series is quite good. The second series, then you get a really crazy episode in the middle of the series, where we meet another Doctor played by Joe Martin from The Real McCoy. He plays the fugitive Doctor. And there is then this question of, well, where does she fit into the timeline? This doesn't make sense. We also get a reappearance of Captain Jack in that episode, which was completely kept from audiences. Nobody had any idea this was going to happen. And he hadn't been on screen for years prior to this. And we get a really good new portrayal of the Master as well, where I think, much as I really love John Sim as an actor, he's just amazing in everything. His Master, I never felt like he was that disturbed. The Master that we meet in the Jodie Whittaker years is just terrifying. He feels like he would actually just kill everybody, like in the blink of an eye.
Definitely very more unhinged,
Definitely unhinged. But Sacha Darwin is the actor, and he was in he was in Line of Duty, and I'm sure they said to him, "Can you come on and be as scary as that?" And he absolutely pulls that off. That I think there's some really good stuff in the 13th Doctor. The first couple of series, the final one is kind of restricted by COVID and certainly a decrease in budget at the BBC. I think anyone in the UK knows that the BBC is not in the healthiest place at the moment. Not that the show is entirely funded by the license fee or something, but you can really see almost this starting to struggle with the budget. That was the thing that had sort of become the bane of it in the 80s as well. And I do remember getting to the end of Flux and just seeing some really bad CG. I mean, it's been some bad CG in Hollywood films recently as well. Yeah. But thinking, I'm not sure if this is going to last much longer if they don't change the approach here.
But Doctor Who's in a tricky place anyway right now, because even with Peter Capaldi, great an actor is, how do you had a great run from Eccleston onwards and riding a high, and then you said, well, what's the, you can't keep getting younger, and how do we change things up? How do we keep it fresh? And it's a bit of a difficult place for it. You'd have to mine a new era for a new generation, because even from the Eccleston era, it's 10, 15 years, and like, how do you, for a new generation who's like, well, what's my Doctor going to be? So it's a bit of a tricky case.
I do strongly feel that, like, I think Jodie Whittaker's a really good actor. I do think the writing kind of let her down her era, because I was expecting the thing of them coming on being very, particularly Matt Smith's first episode. I mean, he's eating fish fingers in custard and stuff. I thought they're going to start it like that, and they're going to get her darker. And there was particularly like a cliffhanger or like an end point where I thought, oh, they're doing some heavy signing that it's going to get dark towards the end. It never did.
No.
And I felt like it needed that to make her Doctor sort of really memorable for that stuff as well, because she did the light and the eccentricity and the playfulness very well. But we never really got that. So it's Mandip Gill played Yasmin. I do think as well that the relationship that come out between those two felt very organic and unforced, and it was just like when they're left as the two when the other two companions depart, you really did feel like there was some kind of bond in the way that you did with the Ninth Doctor and Rose, and it's never really completely explained, and it feels quite sad that nothing does happen between them, and it's kind of she's keeping her at a distance. And I think some of those final scenes, so the final episode, Power of the Doctor, is it was also a special for the BBC centenary, so 100 years of the BBC. And this episode has a lot of returning Doctors in it and their companions. So we knew that Janet Fielding was going to return as Tegan from the Peter Davison era, and Ace was going to return as Sophie Aldred.
Yeah.
But they see versions of their Doctors projected when they're dealing with them, and other Doctors reappear. And the scene that really kind of broke me at the end of this, I mean, Yasmin and the Doctors sat on the TARDIS sort of saying goodbye, just watching the world, felt very sad. But you get this moment where there's a counselling session at the end, or like a sort of support session that she's attending, and when you look up, it's all people at this thing. It looks like an AA meeting, whatever one of those is, I wouldn't know. But everybody sat drinking cups of tea, and there's all old companions there talking about, well, we saw these wonderful things, and then we have to come home, and we don't know how to assimilate back into life. And then the thing that really took me by surprise is someone says she, and then you hear an old person say, sorry, did you say she? And it's Ian Chesterton from the first companion from the day, looking old but still completely identifiable as himself. And it's a really sort of like moving human moment at the end of it. So I think, yeah, particularly the final season wasn't sort of its finest moment, but they kind of redeemed themselves a little bit in that final episode. And then this ends with a regeneration. We knew at this point that Ncuti Gatwa was going to be the next Doctor. Well, I think, did we know at this point that David Tennant was filming again? I think we did.
I think
we knew he was filming, but we thought it might be like a Three Doctors thing, so we didn't know he would be the next.
Yeah, we thought maybe it would be I mean, because it's only later on that the scheduling, I think I think he was some scheduling conflict, so he wasn't available. So then they brought in David Tennant, as in Russell T Davies, I think, was thinking, well, look, actually, I've got a perfect segue, and he didn't even, he kind of like just almost organically thought this works, and I think it's a good opportunity probably to tie up some loose ends. I think, especially with the Catherine Tate and David Tennant era, because we come to this 60th anniversary. Well, in this 60th anniversary, well, it serves like it because we're revisiting an old Doctor before the new one, kind of this bridging almost
comes in. Yeah, I think it's a way of a sort of love letter back to those. I mean, it's Russell. He writes it in his way. Everybody writes it in their own way, but he's coming back as showrunner. He clearly does love the show. In the meantime, he's done an amazing thing. I mean, It's a Sin, I think, is one of the best TV shows of the decade so far. He is a great writer, but this is very much a sort of a sequel to The Journey's End. It's also obviously an adaptation of The Star Beast, which is a Pat Mills and Dave Gibbons comic strip from the very well considered, and rightfully so, initial run of Doctor Who comics for the Fourth Doctor, in Doctor Who Weekly as it was back then. And that was sort of the start of their career as well. They then went off to 2000 AD, and then on to, Dave Gibbons onto Watchmen. And obviously they were creating at the time things that couldn't be realised on TV at the time, and they've managed in the Star Beast, which if we're sort of just doing a little review of it now, but we said on the chat, I think I think the realisation of the creature is really good, and it is a mix of a practical costume and CG effects, so you get the best of both worlds. And I even listened to the video commentary on the iPlayer because I'm such a geek, and I haven't done that. Do you know what? I never even did stuff like that in the Matt Smith era. I think I really wanted to support it, and I did carry on watching it, but I was sort of. I mean, McCoy was my Doctor, but I was really in love with the sort of Eccleston Tennant era. And it was a joy going back. It just feels like you're straight back into it, like you said. It doesn't feel like, oh, and now we explain all this stuff.
It just goes straight into, and it is like they snap back into the characters straight away. The energy is there. It's quite about turn after the Jodie Whittaker and writing, where I felt it was just a bit too chaotic, so much going on. It's best when it works as one companion and one dog, and a relationship between those two.
Yeah.
So that seems to be the thread of the story. As fantastical as it was, as you say, I don't think it was serviced well by good writing in that last incarnation. But then when you've seen a writer who does understand the characters he's formulated there and their relationship, it does feel like, the last few years hasn't happened. It's like it's absolutely bang on, goes straight in. Considering the time frame of an episode, it just goes in there. But you're right. I think we reached a period where the post CG, where we're trying to really more mature with our use of tools, and a great a limitation of budget. It does bring in inventiveness, and you only play to the strengths of each technology. Great puppetry, great production, and then just CG just to augment performances, but not become the effect, which is hugely expensive for a BBC production. But I think this is a great balance.
I used to get really frustrated when people say, "Oh, it's all CG," and I think, well, I don't care as long as it looks good. And I think that's the key. But then I think when you've seen so much bad CG, and I think you don't really notice necessarily when something's good, but you notice when it's not good.
Yeah.
So it's only when there's a bad effect. Like even in the Marvels, there's a point where there's something that should just be green screened, and they're like in a hangar, which looks suspiciously like a hangar from Doctor Strange, and they're confronting Zoroaster, and it's just green screened against the sky, and you can tell it's green screened in. It's like if you just shot that outside, you wouldn't need to even green screen it. It would just be the sky, and you wouldn't question it. But suddenly you go, the lighting just looks a bit off. And they always say Jurassic Park, Starship Troopers hold up very well because there was a lot of practical work, and then the CG artists had lighting reference that they got right. And I remember Stan Winston in the making of Jurassic Park saying, just doing CG work for the sake of it is backwards. Do it practical if you can.
Yeah.
If you can't do it on a computer. The thing is that takes time. It takes people to, the physical storage of it and the props and things. So I get why they don't, but it really pays off in this.
Well,
they even said
I
with the
think
Star Beast,
also,
they did a third version which didn't make the cut, which was when it was running, they had a version that attached to someone's legs, and they would green screen the actor out for close-ups, and they said they don't think any of that footage made it in, but trying those things to see what works, it takes more time, but you get a better result out of it. And I think it really looks a lot better than some work that I've seen on Hollywood productions. And obviously they've now got a large injection of cash from Disney Plus. Apparently not as much as a Star Wars budget, I saw them say, but they've got enough to just make this work.
I think they outfit well. They outfitted it with a great new TARDIS interior, and I think it's one of the best ever. I mean, you can be as nostalgic as you can, but it looks absolutely grand and beautiful.
It looks like Hartnell's TARDIS as well.
Yes,
they found a way
a bit
to
of a
make
throwback,
it like the old one, but not
those
look
colours,
look low budget in 60s like that. So they found a way to have that aesthetic, but we have this on a massive scale, because there are jokes in the first Russell T Davies era, which I suppose we have to call it now, about going past the bins, and that what you see on screen, it's actually bigger than what it is, but you only obviously see that, but it's huge, the new interior. Yeah,
I think also maybe we're talking about practicals and the effects and with 80s. I think here, because with Doctor Who, you kind of have always a great performance usually behind a villain, or we could talk about Davros or even Cyberman or the Master, whatever alien, it tends to have. There's always a big because it's a bit of a more of a talky piece, a bit more kind of like an exchange of philosophy. So you're going to have an actor in there to because it's a dramatic show, quite honestly, and that plays to its strength. It's not really a big gunfight at the end. It's usually a
Well, the Doctor
an
doesn't
outlet
carry
of
guns. That's another. I mean, we
well,
haven't
that's the
spoken
thing.
about that, but
Yes.
that's kind of a thing that is a character point
So
as well,
it's
isn't it?
not really. So I think you're always gonna. It works best as a practical effect with makeup and CG when you need it. But it sounds like a quite good
But
balance.
they did do. I noticed in an interview as well, Russell T Davis. Someone said, "Oh, it looks really cute, the Star Beast," and he started going, "Oh yeah, where are the plushes? Where are the?" And I like the fact that he kept the thing that if you read the comic, you know about the Star Beast. They kind of didn't give that away. They just kind of went with it, and I thought it's kind of interesting because anyone who's read it knows what the twist is. But and it's a really good voice performance by Marion
Oh
Margulies as
yeah,
well.
yeah, she does.
It
Again, a good
really
actress, a good,
comes
really
to
good
life.
performance behind it. See,
Yeah,
or
yeah,
even
because she's
voice
basically
work.
got to be two characters for that.
Yes.
Um, and then we go into the next special, Wild Blue Yonder, which apparently there's only one shot in the original trailer, and we've seen very little of. I I don't know. I've seen a thing where it says that they've not announced the cast list. I don't know if we're going to have returning characters though. I think it's just going to be a dark, claustrophobic episode, and they're just trying to not give you any clues about it. So apparently, one of the things that Russell T Davis particularly said when they brought it back is they would have tone meetings. So for each episode, they would say, here's a word, and this is what the episode is to give it that different flavor. Because the Doctor's meant to go about in time and space,
Mm,
but everything's got to then feel like we're in a different place. So things that we've spoken about with the MCU of trying to have the same tone to make it
yeah.
gel, they're actually trying to fight against that on Doctor Who. I don't think it's been like that particularly for the Moffat and Chibnall stuff. I think they've tried to make it more like a universe. But the idea of apparently the first one they said they just wanted it to feel like a classic Who story that could be any at any point. This one's meant to be quite scary, and then the last one they say is bananas. So the last one, I'm sure, obviously, it's going to end with Shooty Gatwa as we go into the Christmas special, which is the start of the new series, and I think will be a jumping on point. I wonder though if the final episode, rather than just ending with the regeneration, is going to have him maybe switching between personas or something. We've
But
got
this is the thing I
the
was thinking of
toy
missing
maker
for our
coming in.
60th anniversary because it's
Yeah,
like traditionally we have this like we mentioned the three doctors or the five doctors or even the 50th anniversary where you have this interplay, and I'm thinking that's the only one thing that we're kind of
but
missing
the,
here.
the only thing is you've had the power of the Doctor, and the end of that does have. So you have Davison. No, there's no Tom Baker in that, but you have Davison, uh, Colin Baker, Sylvester McCoy, Paul McGann,
Mm.
and then it ends with David Tennant as the regeneration. So we have had a lot of that in the power of the Doctor. So I don't know how necessarily bringing it back.
Do it.
There was something that Shooty Gatwa said he had, and I felt that he shouldn't have said. He probably would have got in trouble for this, but he said, "I've shot a scene with William Hartnell. Don't ask me how, but I've shot a scene with William Hartnell."
Mm.
However, in the it's a slight spoiler for an adventure in time and space, but if you watch that, it ends with the
That's Smith.
character of William Hartnell there, and as he looks up, he sees Matt Smith, who was
Yeah.
the current Doctor, staring back at him. Now, when they put it back onto iPlayer, and they had to make some edits for other reasons to do with the first story, which we haven't got time to go into, but they thought, oh well, that sort of doesn't make sense if we're repeating it now. So they actually replaced him with Ncuti Gatwa. So he looks up now and sees the current incarnation Ncuti Gatwa looking back at him. I think that's probably what Ncuti Gatwa was talking about. I don't think he has shot anything with William Hartnell, although Jenna Coleman did. So there was an episode of the Matt Smith era where she has a scene with William Hartnell, and they degrade the footage so it looked black and
Oh
white.
yeah. Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
before he steals the TARDIS in the first episode, and they use some old footage. So anything could happen. They've got a budget, and I did see a comment where they were saying we wanted to push the affects people more than possible. The 50th anniversary ends with Matt Smith walking like on a cloud, and then you see stills of all the other doctors behind him, which is as good as you could probably do on a BBC budget 10 years ago. Bearing in mind what people can do with face placement, AI stuff these days, you think they could definitely maybe have, because the doctors that we see in Power of the Doctor are aged. So they are of their current age. And there is a thing on iPlayer at the moment for the Whoniverse, as they call it, called Tales from the TARDIS. And what that is they've taken adventures like the Three Doctors, Curse of Fenric I watched in this version, and it's an omnibus version of the story, but bookended with newly shot scenes of the Doctor back then and the companion then, or companions from that, sort of in an alternate timeline where that Doctor didn't regenerate, talking about their memories of that story, and then you just watch the story, and then you get a little outro as well. So that's nice. So maybe if they can do some CG stuff, having the Doctors as they appeared when they first appeared, like it back in the day, sort of looking at the youthful selves, that will be interesting. And maybe we will get that in the Giggle is the name of the final special, and it's Neil Patrick Harris playing the Toy Maker, the Celestial Toy Maker, who hasn't been seen to the 60s since the 60s. The episode doesn't exist in it, only one episode exists of it now, and it was Michael Gough in the 60s who went on to play Alfred in the Tim Burton Batman.
Oh yes.
Yeah. So he looks like a sort of a master, but a bit of a trickster with it. So if he can pull sort of some kind of deceiving thing over him, there's part of me thinks, is David Tennant really the 14th Doctor? Was it he's actually shooting Gatwa, but something is being projected over him, which is to do with the Celestial Toymaker? I don't think that's the case though, because a lot of like a comic has been released which announces him as the 14th Doctor, so I think they're going to stick with that. And in a way, it's just a way of getting David Tennant back. But maybe we'll have some more familiar faces. But it does also feel like you want to kind of look forward, not just back. I think at this time.
I think it's
particularly the way it's gone. I think maybe with the 50th anniversary, it was riding on the crest of a wave. So bringing back David Tennant,
a great cap on the past. I think it did a great job, because so much of it was such a memorable past. But we're kind of like more into the era post, I'd say post the classic series, more that kind of new wave series, and it has to really evolve. It's been it has to reinvent itself. When you're up against...
if they could get every Doctor back, it would sort of be impressive, but also like, oh well, they've just done that through CGI.
Yeah.
I think if Eccleston appeared, like, people would just go absolutely nuts. But he apparently sort of had a falling out with the production at the time. I think he softened a lot, and during COVID he started doing Big Finish audio plays as the Doctor. Yeah. Sure. So he has softened a lot to this, and I think he realizes as well it's a way to talk about other stuff. You know, he can appear on stuff and talk about Doctor Who, and then talk about other projects as well. And I think he's probably learned to love it a little bit. So, I mean, that would be amazing if he comes back. I don't think that's going to happen, but will Billy Piper return? I don't know how they would do that, how that would fit in with the story.
Yeah, I mean, I was surprised when she appeared in the 50th. Just throw the AI. It's like, I was completely shocked.
Yeah, but it's sort of not Rose, is it? It doesn't work.
No,
I mean, there are rumours that Ryan Gosling, because obviously he appeared with Ncuti Gatwa in the Barbie movie, they're mates, and apparently he is a big fan. He was spotted on set after shoot. He was announced as the Doctor, saying Ncuti is the Doctor. So there are rumours about him appearing in this. I mean, if they've got Neil Patrick Harris, anything's possible. So
yeah, well, it does seem quite. Again, with this big injection of money, I wonder if they'll push to this more aggressively a international or American market, especially with Disney money, because it's going to be on Disney.
So in the UK, BBC retain the rights to show it, across the rest of the world, it will be Disney Plus. Apparently, in Australia, people are a little bit upset about this because since the 60s, it's always been on ABC in America, in Australia, and now internationally, it is Disney Plus. So you have to have Disney Plus to watch it. But I think that's the only way the show could survive. And I think, it's a smart move from Russell T Davies to look at it this way and go, look, it's either going to fold. I mean, panel shows don't even get have been canned on the BBC now. And today we've learned that as we record this, Newsnight is being scaled back. And you think, I don't really know what this means for the BBC other than just running repeats long term. But we can't do anything about that. So I think this is the right way to go for the show, and just to sort of make it evolve, really, and it will bring it to hopefully a bigger audience. I'm really interested to watch Shooty as a Doctor as well, because obviously we know him as from Sex Education, but I think like with Capaldi, he's going to play it in a different. He's going to play it in a different way, and it'll be. And I like the fact as well. I can't remember that it's Millie something, the actress, and she's from Coronation Street. But it looks like they're going to have that kind of vibe from the Ninth Doctor and Rose era of like two people traveling, and sort of they're almost like a couple, but they're not. And I think that's a really good thing, because it's just two, like you say, it's just two characters. I think even with the Jodie Whittaker thing, Toyson Cole's character Ryan was sort of written out in the middle of the second series or something. They kind of went, let's scale this down because it's too many people.
It was just nothing to focus on, and I think that's unfortunate. It was the writing, and I think that was probably part of why it kind of people just unplugged at that point, quite honestly. So
it was also the thing that they put it onto Sunday, because in the UK, I think Sundays is a very good night for sort of grown-up drama, if you like. So we've had Woman in the Wall this year, Boiling Point, which I was saying on the previous meetup, I don't think they should have done this as a TV series. I've watched it now. It's one of the best TV series of the year. Very different to the film. Very, very good. Line of Duty is a huge show in the UK. And I'm sure they moved it to that for those reasons. But there is something about Doctor Who being on a Saturday night that works. And when it was reintroduced in the noughties, I mean, Saturday night was just X Factor shows, reality TV shows. There's still an element of that now, and people were like, it's just going to die if they put it on at this time on Saturday. But that's where it started back in the 60s, Saturday night. They tried to kill it off by moving it opposite Coronation Street in the 80s. That was another thing with scheduling. But I think putting it on at a proper time, so 6:30, not 6:45 or anything like that, and at the top of an hour or a half hour,
solid time
for the live audience. I mean, we're sort of out of that now that everyone watches stuff on catch up anyway. But
yeah, I think a bit of confidence, though. It kind of like, this is our flagship.
Do you know what? That's a really good point. It feels like it now. Again, it is a show that to care about. I think even getting rid of the Christmas specials, because they had New Year specials, that felt like a step down in the Chibnall years. It's sort of like putting it on Christmas Day is a big show of confidence in it. Putting it on a Saturday night is a big show of confidence in it. Having a Whoniverse collection on iPlayer is a big sort of
it's about dance. It's kind of best when it knows it should be proud of the show, not ashamed, and that's when it does best. I think and when they put their confidence behind it and they're proud about it, and it's worth celebrating. People do tend to, what is this show? Okay, let's check it out, and I think that's what happens.
And I think with Russell T Davies and David Tennant, because David Tennant didn't have to come back and do this, but he is a genuine fan. You can just see that, he's presenting documentaries and he's doing commentaries and behind the scenes shows, and that enthusiasm and love for the show really comes across in both of those men's sort of interviews that they do. And it's very infectious as well. You suddenly want to know. I mean, the making ofs are really candid as well. They tell you everything that works, everything that doesn't work, everything that was made as a budgetary decision. We wanted to do this, but we couldn't do it. And that kind of honesty is really, like, sort of, it's really
just remind me of the extras we used to get on those a bit younger won't know, but you used to get extras on some stuff called the Blu-rays and DVDs. You used to get.
I remember these.
Well, you look in your history books, and or if you know what a book is, but it is a they were actually fascinating, and this and Doctor Who Confidential, because you got so much practical work actually back in there, and you do appreciate the craftsmanship, and it is a fascinating watch, which we've kind of lost now in the age of.
I really agree with you. Actually, I did see, and there was a point where I thought maybe with Blu-rays they give away too much, the behind-the-scenes stuff. I don't think it is. I used to watch Confidential religiously, and it's the long versions on iPlayer, the half-hour versions, not the 15-minute cut-down versions. That show is kind of being rebooted now as Doctor Who Unleashed, and it's really good. They just, even with there was a little Children in Need skit that they did with the Davros actor from years ago, and they're explaining why they've changed the character. And you go, yeah, I can't argue with that. That's absolutely the right thing to do. And you understand why they've made that decision. I think other franchises might benefit from this. It's weird because we're very much, even at the start of New Who, actually, we weren't really in the social media era. Everybody I know got onto Facebook in about 2007. So it wasn't that, and that stuff does obviously still exist. And I'm sure there's stuff online about it. I don't really look at it, but yeah, I think those behind the scene things are really, really interesting. Like you appreciate the craftsmanship, like you said.
Wow. Well,
that went on longer than I thought.
Yeah, James. Well, I think we actually are out of time ourselves. Unlike the Good Doctor, it seems an interesting period now to see where it goes in its own future. But for now, James, thank you for joining me, and this was our Doctor Who special, and we'll see you next time.
We hope you enjoyed this film and TV review.com episode. Catch the latest film and TV reviews, together with regular episode content from the world of film and TV every week. See you soon. Would you like to reach our film and TV review podcast audience? Do you have a product or service of interest to film and TV home consumers or followers of the entertainment industry? Have a film or show production to publicize? For affordable price plans for all budgets, get in touch and find out about our introductory advertising options. Reach our audience of film and TV viewers and visit our site contact page at filmandtvreview.com, or you can email us at business@filmandtvreview.com. Reach out today.